Welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Services Delegated Committee. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile telephones are turned off or switched to silent. Thank you. The Services Delegated Committee meeting is being live streamed on the Council website, so you'll be able to view the proceedings of the meeting, councillor deliberations and voting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the Council website as soon as practicable after the meeting. Should technical problems be encountered during the meeting will be adjourned until the problem is rectified, or if needed, the meeting will be postponed. My name is Councillor Jane Addis and I'm Chair of this committee. I'll start by introducing my fellow councillors and officers. So seated to my left at the horseshoe table in the council chamber are Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Susan Bigger, Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Nick Stavrou, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, and then moving round the table on the opposite side we have Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, Councillor Wes Galt, Councillor Di Gillies, the Mayor, Councillor Gary Thompson and Councillor Victor Franco. I'd also like to acknowledge that Miss Nina Taylor, Member for Southern Metropolitan Region, and Mr John Kennedy, Member for Hawthorn, are also in attendance tonight. The officers in attendance tonight, to my immediate right, Philip Storer, our Chief Executive Officer. To my left and behind Councillor Stavrou, Carolyn McLean, Director Community Support, and Daniel Freer, Director Places and Spaces. And then to my right and behind Councillor Gillies, we have Bruce Dobson, Director Customer and Transformation, Nick Lund, Acting Director Urban Living. And then to my immediate left, Kristen Ritchie, Coordinator Governance, and Elizabeth Manu, Senior Governance Officer. And there are also a number of other staff members in attendance this evening to assist us. The purpose of the Services Delegated Committee is to deal with issues relating to the provision of human and physical services and Council's infrastructure. For those in the gallery presenting this evening, when we come to the agenda item, it will first be introduced by an officer and then I'll call you one by one to come forward and address Council. When you're making a submission, you're requested to present your viewpoint clearly and concisely on why you agree or disagree with the proposal, and you may also suggest something that may satisfy you. And if people could please not repeat what earlier speakers have said and keep the discussion focused on relevant issues. There is a limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, and that includes councillors. So look, I'll ask the speakers to sit at the end of the horseshoe table, and at the 2.5 minute mark, I will ring the bell, which indicates you have 30 seconds remaining, and if you could please conclude your presentation. And then after you've spoken, if you remain seated, while I ask if any councillor has a question for you. Thank you. Now we'll move to apologies. Ms Ritchie, are there any apologies for this evening?
Through you, Chair, there are no apologies for tonight's meeting.
Thank you very much. The next item is adoption and confirmation of the minutes of the Services Delegated Committee meeting held on 28th of June 2021. I can see Councillor Park's light on. Are you
so
happy
moved,
to
Chair?
move? And seconded Councillor Stavrou?
Yes,
Thank you. For the benefit of the mover and seconder, is anyone opposed to that motion? No. So Councillor Park or Councillor Stavrou, you don't wish to speak to the motion. So look, I'll declare that motion carried as there is nobody against it. We'll put it into, all right, okay. Okay, I'll put it to the vote anyway. Thanks very much. Those in favour? Thank you. Nobody opposed? Thank you. The next item is declaration of conflict of interest of any councillor or council officer. Councillors and council officers, are there any conflicts of interest that need to be declared? Councillor Thompson, our Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In accordance with good governance, item 3.1, Camberwell Green, I've got a conflict and I'll declare that when we get to the item.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gillies.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Not so much a conflict of interest, but just in the interests of transparency, I believe I should say something. Your call now or at the beginning of the item?
Would you like now? Yes.
Okay, just to declare that I'm a past parent and past school council president of Camberwell Primary School.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Franco.
Thank you. If it's okay with you, Chair, I'd like to make a short statement on whether I have a conflict of interest in relation to item 3.1, whether now or at the commencement of the item.
If it's brief now.
Thank you. Look, I'd like to say that I will not be participating in the debate tonight, and I'd like to explain the reason for this. I've taken all due care, including having reviewed the issues at length with various experts in the field, and I've had regard to all the facts and circumstances, including my past association and leadership of the Camberwell Green Steering Committee, my advocacy for Camberwell Green, my having made election commitments to restore the open space as part of my election to council in October 2020, and my concern that all councillors, myself included, are entitled to a parking permit that enables us to park in the reserve road car park beyond the time limits which apply to the general public, and which in itself may constitute a conflict of interest. And it's for this reason that I've not taken up the privilege of accepting or using such a permit. I do not consider that I have a conflict of interest. I consider this my public duty to stay in the chamber and participate in this debate. However, I'm faced with a dilemma. The Chief Executive Officer, Philip Storer, has confirmed to me in writing that he considers that I do have a general conflict of interest in relation to Camberwell Green, given my leadership of the Camberwell Green Steering Committee and my past advocacy for the restoration of the open space.
Have you nearly
The CEO
finished?
has also, it's not long, and
Okay.
if I could end the statement, thank you. The CEO has also told me that most of my fellow councillors also believe I have a conflict of interest. I cast no aspersions on anyone. I accept that the views of the CEO and the others in this chamber, which differ from mine, are genuinely held. And I do not consider, however, that it can be sensibly said that a councillor has a general conflict of interest solely on the basis of honouring or acting in accordance with an election commitment or their past advocacy or leadership on matters of public policy. It has also been confirmed to me in writing that if I choose to remain in the council chamber for the discussion this evening regarding Camberwell Green, the CEO will report me to the local government inspectorate. Again, I cast no aspersions on anyone. I accept that the views of the CEO and others which differ from mine are held sincerely. But in all the circumstances, it's incumbent on me to explain truthfully and transparently to those in our community who have supported me for the reasons why I'll be recusing myself tonight and why I will not be participating in the debate on Camberwell Green. I'm faced with a difficult choice. Should I stand by my principles and my commitment to the residents of Boroondara and thereby expose myself? I have about 30 seconds to go, Chair, if that. Or should I recuse myself and abandon my public duty? In light of the situation I face, in consideration of the resources of council that can be brought against me, which will be much greater than my own, and in light of the personal, emotional, financial and time pressures that this will bring upon me and by extension upon my family, I see no option but to recuse myself tonight. So, thank you.
Okay, so we'll note those conflicts in the minutes. Thank you. So we'll now move to item 3.1, Camberwell Green, correspondence received from Victorian School Building Authority, and we have two people who are declaring a conflict of interest. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, in accordance with the Act, I have a material conflict of interest in the fact that the decision for consideration tonight relates to the Victorian School Building Authority. In my private capacity, I'm a director of a practice which is a panel architect for the Victorian School Building Authority, and therefore, by virtue of the decision ahead of us tonight, I have a direct interest, so I'll be requesting to be excused. Thanks,
Thank you.
Chair.
Thanks. So we'll pause for a minute. Thank you very much. So I'll now hand over to Robert Costello, Senior Project Planner, to present on Camberwell Green. Thank you.
Chair, might I just seek your indulgence to ask the CEO a question? I do so out of an abundance of caution. My view is that no possible conflict could arise, but Councillor Franco made reference to councillor parking permits, and whilst I've never availed myself of parking at that location and propose never to do so, out of an abundance of caution, I'd be interested to hear whether any advice was given to Councillor Franco just in respect of that issue.
Are you able to respond to that?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. No advice was given to Councillor Franco in relation to that issue, and I might add that this has been raised with myself in terms of whether or not councillors and staff themselves have a conflict in this matter. That has been raised with our lawyers, who have been quite clear in making the point that they do not believe there to be any such conflict based on that circumstance.
Thank you. That was my view as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parkin. That's probably very useful for us all to hear that, so thank you. So look, I'll now hand back to Robert Costello to present on this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. The purpose of this report is to inform the Services Delegated Committee of correspondence received from the Victorian School Building Authority advising Council that government funding has been secured for the redevelopment of land known as the Reserve Road car park from its current use as a car park to open space. The car park, comprising Crown Allotment 113C and part of Crown Allotment 113D, is currently used by staff of the adjoining Camberwell Primary School, people working at and visiting the council offices and library, and the general public. Council is the committee of management for the land. According to the Government Gazette of January 1969, the Crown Land Parcel Allotment 113C was reserved for children's playground, car park, and Crown Allotment 113D was reserved for public gardens. The Victorian School Building Authority has confirmed 2 financial grants have been made available to Camberwell Primary School to enable the proposal to proceed. The total funding allocation is approximately $1.8 million. The Victorian School Building Authority is seeking council support for the re-reservation of Crown Allotment 113C for education purposes, to enable the land to come into the control of the Minister for Education and form part of the adjoining Camberwell Primary School. The Victorian School Building Authority also requests council sign a draft construction access licence to allow the authority to carry out due diligence site investigations. Officers recommend the Services Delegated Committee oppose the re-reservation based on the previous resolution of the Services Special Committee of the 18th of November 2019, noting the following. The proposal by the Victorian School Building Authority to re-reserve the land for education purposes and transfer control to the Minister for Education for use by the Camberwell Primary School during school hours, whilst public use is limited to outside of school hours, is inconsistent with the vision put forward by the Camberwell Green Association for a public park. The proposed re-reservation of the land for educational purposes rather than public park and recreation purposes raises significant concerns about the potential for the land to be used for buildings in the future. Council has also opposed the use of its funds in full or in part to fund ongoing maintenance of the land, given its opposition to the proposal. The Victorian School Building Authority does not require Council's support for the re-reservation of the land to proceed on the basis of the land being Crown land. There is no strategic basis under the Boroondara Open Space Strategy of 2013 to increase the provision of public open space in this location. Further, the land use analysis prepared by Urbis confirms no additional public open space is expected to be required in this area until at least 2031 to 2041. While the closure of Reserve Road, previously proposed by the Camberwell Green Association and Camberwell Primary School, was considered by the Services Special Committee on the 10th of August 2020, it is out of scope of the Victorian School Building Authority proposal and its funding allocation. It is noted Council remains opposed to the proposal unless the school proposes to redirect Reserve Road traffic through the land being considered for re-reservation, and that any consideration of such a request would be subject to further analysis by Council and consultation with the local community. Officers are recommending the construction access licence be signed by the Director of Urban Living to allow the authority to carry out its due diligence site investigations only. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr Costello. Now, I believe we have 8 speakers wishing to make submissions on this item. So if I could ask Mr Stuart Lindsay to please come forward to the end of the horseshoe table. And if you could please, for the record, state your name and address, interest in the item, and whether you're for or against the officer's recommendation. I'll just remind you there's 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. My name's Stuart Lindsay. I'm the President of School Council at Camberwell Primary School. I reside at 11 Marlborough Avenue, Camberwell. I'm against this recommendation. Camberwell Primary School does want to see this space turned into play space for our school. Our Vice President is here tonight and we'll go into more of the reasons, but we do have one of the most crowded schools in the state. But what I'd like to do is talk about what makes Camberwell Primary different. It's not a school that can be substituted out, that we can say, hey, I'll send my kids to another school, a larger school or something like that. So I'd like to talk through what our bilingual program looks like. When I went to school and learnt languages, I'd go into class and my teacher would be saying, okay, you'd do the roll and all that sort of stuff, and then he'd start to say, now in French, we say bonjour to say hello, and we'd all repeat it, and we'd all write it down, and we'd all start working on our vocab and our grammar. Camberwell Primary, our kids come, little 5-year-olds on the first day of school, they're scared, they're fearful, they're worried, they're concerned, they're excited, and they get greeted by their teacher warmly, who introduces themselves. The child introduces themselves. They sit down with the other kids. They go through the roll call. They explain to kids what that's about, how to answer. They tell them off for talking, for moving. Then they get them settled in and they get them working on their first activity together. That whole process is completely done in French. These kids have not heard a word of English during that process. Follow the bouncing ball. I should say in foundation, our kids spend 80% of their day in French. So this is not an English school with a bit of French. This is a French school with a bit of English. So it is unique. We go down a year, and I'll just share some anecdotes of a grade 1 parent telling me that their child was having an issue in class, and the parent said, would you like me to talk to the teacher? And the child's response was, you can't, she doesn't speak English. Now, that's the world these kids live in. And then you go on to grade 6, and the parent who said, our kids compete in maths competitions, Australian maths competitions, and the French national maths competitions. And this mother was having a discussion with their child about the competition they'd been in that day, talking through all the questions, etc. And then at the end, she asked the throwaway question, and what language was it in? The boy had absolutely no idea. He didn't know if it was in French or in English. So these kids read in French, they listen in French, they speak in French, but they think in French. This is absolutely unique. Now, of course, the next question is, well, how do they go in English? You know, and we look at our NAPLAN results where they get assessed in English, their writing, their spelling, their grammar, as well as their maths. And I'm not saying these other schools are the benchmarks, but a Camberwell Primary grade 3, grade 5 student, boy, is on par with a boy at Scotch College Junior School. A girl at Camberwell Primary is on par with a girl at MLC Junior School. The fact that they're doing that while they're learning this French and absorbing that is just absolutely incredible. So what we're building here, what we're nurturing here, and what we're asking council to build and help nurture is this absolutely unique education model that can't be replaced. We can't simply send our kids to another school to get this. They do not get it anywhere else. Camberwell Primary is absolutely unique. So thank you for your time. To the new faces I haven't met before, I congratulate you on your election. To those I have seen before, I congratulate you on your re-election. So thank you. Questions? Sorry.
Thank you, Mr Lindsay. I can see Councillor Watson has a light on with a query.
Yes, I do. Thank you for your presentation. Mr Lindsay, you mentioned that you are opposed to the proposal put forward by Council tonight. Could you please clarify in what way you're opposed to it? I took some notes. You said that you're a crowded school and you need play space. This is quite a long motion. Are you opposed to all of it or in part, and could you explain why?
Oh gosh, and I'm not familiar with every clause in there, I'm afraid. But look, we want to see this car park turned into play space for our students. It's quite simply, we want to support the Victorian School Building Authority in achieving that.
Okay, so yeah, could I, with your indulgence,
Chair? I'm sorry, I can't refer to the specific paragraph.
So simply, you have a crowded school, you want more play space for the children. That's
Correct.
why you're opposed to the motion?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a question from Councillor Gold.
Thank you for your presentation tonight. Look, just taking this opportunity, you may not be the one to ask this question off, but to give us an idea of the sort of external space that your school requires. We're not planners in this sort of area, but I'd be keen to know how you estimate that and what else the school might need in the way of safety, buildings, etc., etc. It would be good to know what the school's requirements were in that regard.
And we do have a graph, and I don't have it here this evening, of sort of students per square metre at schools in the area. And you have a whole bunch of primary schools here and over here, and there's this Camberwell Primary spike, this huge spike of students per square metre. If we were to add in that car park space, we'd pretty much come back to the field. We would be where we want to be, where we need to be, and probably self-sufficient for the foreseeable future. So that's our intention there. As far as buildings are concerned, yes, we will need more buildings. Council has advised, I think it's 8.5% population growth in primary age students each 5 years. But we need more. So we need more buildings, but we can accommodate those on our current footprint.
Can I just extend that a little bit? Just asking further, what your growth has been in recent years in student numbers, and is there a sort of cap that would be placed on the size of the school as it grows? So, for instance, the Department of Education may say, no more growth here, we may build another school somewhere else. Is there a capping limit to how big the school can grow?
I'm not, honestly, I'm not privy to that information. We currently have about 640 students. It is down a little bit in the last couple of years. We peaked at about 697 a few years ago, and we've got a large cohort going through at the moment with a little mini baby boom that happened a few years ago. The Department of Education has put a cap on our current population of 850 students. What happens beyond that, I can't answer that question.
Thank you. Councillor Bigger.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lindsay. I will say that I, many years ago now, also sent my 3 children to Camberwell Primary School, so I have great respect for the programme there and the way it works. And one of my questions was going to be the number of students. I think when my kids started it, the number of students began with a 3. So clearly we've had significant changes. But I know you don't know all the ins and outs of the exact bits of the recommendation here, but there is a recommendation in point 5 up there to write to Camberwell Primary that council remains opposed to the closure of Reserve Road, and I'd be interested to know what the school council view is of that, whether that's an issue you wanted to give us a perspective on.
Look, the only answer I could give to that at this stage is that we would welcome that letter from council.
So you'd welcome a letter?
Yes, yes. We haven't, I can't answer on behalf of council on that issue.
Whether council supports or is opposed to?
Until it's been put to us by council.
But you'd be happy to have a dialogue about what happens with Reserve Road, is that?
Sorry?
Is that what you're saying? You'd be happy to have a dialogue with?
Absolutely, absolutely, but we'd love that formal approach from Boroondara City Council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stavron.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I have a question that relates a little bit to Councillor Gold's, and you may not have the numbers given your previous answer, but in terms of the growth that you've experienced, it sounds spectacular growth, and apart from what we're hearing, it's an excellent school. Can you elucidate at all whether the growth and how it compares with the broader population growth in your area and broader Boroondara?
No, I can't. I don't have access to that information. What I can just say anecdotally, though, is that our student population growth is due, obviously, to 3 reasons. Families who live in the area and have kids and send them to Camberwell Primary. Families who move into the area and look up the local school and send them to Camberwell Primary. And the final one, and this is an increasing one, is the number of parents who deliberately move into the Camberwell Primary School zone to send their kids to Camberwell Primary. And I don't have statistics on that, but that is an increasingly large number or proportion of families doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lindsay, for your presentation. And certainly, I'm hearing what you're saying. I think we're hearing what you're saying. You're very passionate about the school, and it sounds like an incredible school. Do you know what the zone limit is, for example? Is it within a 1 kilometre radius of the school? Or?
It's not a perfect circle as such. You know, if you look sort of west, you know, it doesn't extend too far beyond Burke Road. If you go east, it goes some distance down Camberwell Road. So it's sort of possibly skewed a little bit more to the west, but look, if you said a kilometre, yes, yeah, give or take in some areas.
Just one more question. Has any research been done on how parents are currently transporting their children to school? For example, do you know how many are driving, how many are riding, how many are walking, how many are using the tram?
No, we don't.
Know at this stage?
No, we don't know that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. I think we've exhausted the questions. If you'd like to return to your seat, thank you. Thanks for your presentation. Our next speaker is Miss Meg Boyle, if you'd like to come forward. And I think if you want to take your mask off, you are able to while you speak. Thank you. And if you could start with your name and address and interest and whether you're for or against the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. My name is Meg Boyle and my address is 20 Griffin Street, Camberwell, and I am the chair of Camberwell Green, and that's my interest in this matter. As for being for or against, I'm generally against it, except for number 4, confirming, I think it was, sorry, I'm just quickly trying to read it. Thank you.
So it says, right to VSBA requesting a written commitment confirming the land proposed for re-reservation will not in the future be used to accommodate school buildings and will remain open space / playground for the school.
Sure. I'm generally opposed to the statement, except for the fact of approving the request for the VSBA to have the construction access licence. So otherwise opposed.
Okay, if you'd like to continue with your presentation.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which I am standing today, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Thank you. Camberwell Green is a community group of members who saw an opportunity to convert a car park in our local area to green space for all of our community to enjoy. The idea to restore the historic park was good for the health and well-being of the community, and it was positive for the environment. We wanted to create a flowing green space from the junction right through to the Civic Centre. We imagined a vibrant space where community could come together to take a stroll in the garden, to meet a friend, to celebrate events, to showcase artwork such as sculptures, to sit quietly and read a book, or to share a meal on a picnic on a rug under the shade of trees while children ran and played. We wanted to restore a historic park, a park that was there since 1869, and we wanted to create a park for future generations to enjoy. We had wide support for our vision from individuals and organisations within the community. We took our proposal to Boroondara City Council for consideration. In 2019, they flatly rejected our proposal. We took our proposal to the state government and they listened to our idea. They saw the benefits of increased green space and they invested in the local community. They invested financially with $1.76 million worth of funding, and they invested time and effort to see this vision become a reality. Camberwell Green is grateful to the state government, particularly to John Kennedy and Nina Taylor. Thank you. We commend their strong leadership and their commitment to the local community and the environment. I also want to thank a few councillors who have supported Camberwell Green. They've come with an openness to working with all stakeholders and putting aside political differences to make a positive change. They are a few who truly care about representing the communities who elected them.
Point of order, Chair. This presentation really is straying into a political speech, and if we're about to go into acknowledging individual councillors and the like, it's simply inappropriate.
Look, maybe we've only got about half a minute left, so if you'd like to return to the important
I won't acknowledge any councillors. Thank you.
you.
The VSBA have put forward a proposal to change the Committee of Management and re-reserve 113C so that work can begin on creating Camberwell Green. They've proposed creating play space where there is shared between Camberwell Primary School and the wider community. It's a positive, collaborative approach that enables better facilities for all of our community. Tonight, we ask Boroondara councillors to see this as an opportunity to show your commitment to the environment, your commitment to listening to your local community, your commitment to working collaboratively with a wide range of stakeholders, and your commitment to parks in Boroondara. We can all work collaboratively together for the benefit of the community if you are willing.
Now we need you to wrap up.
Tonight is your opportunity to be part of an exciting proposal that could transform the area.
I'm afraid
Please vote to support the re-reservation of the change of the Committee of Management of 113C so we can all work together to create a beautiful shared green space. Thank you.
I can't see. Councillor Stavrey, you have a question?
I do, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Moore. You mentioned the environment. Could you, enlighten us on how much it will contribute to CO2 contributions if it were to be changed to a green space?
I can't give you the data on that, but what I can tell you is that trees are better than cars.
Okay. May I have a follow-up question?
You've got a follow-up question?
I do. And just to help us when we're deliberating, the current space is being used by many, many users in Boroondara, and the library next to it is an essential part of Boroondara in terms of an asset. How can we think about the sort of balancing act of taking it away from a broader community and making it available only for very few?
Thank you, Councillor Stabro. I think that's an interesting question because prior to the pandemic, it was almost impossible to get a car park there if you're a member of the community because it was filled with cars of Boroondara City Council workers. So you can tell that because of the little stickers on there. I was at that car park every day and I was never able to get a car park there. So I don't think that it's broadly used by the community pre-pandemic times. Certainly it's easier to get a car park there now, which shows that perhaps that Boroondara City Councillors don't need that car park anymore for themselves, given that they're now working from home. And as for the other users of that car park, Camberwell Primary School, as I understand it, pay commercial parking rates to use that. As far as I understand, they're willing to give up those car parks in the interest of having play space and for the community and for their children.
Thank you. Now, did that answer your question, Councillor Staver? Are you like, yep.
I guess I would have liked for the answer to have actually balanced those two, not saying that it doesn't currently fulfil the purpose that I asked, because nominally it is a car park that's available to the wider community. If it is taken in the way that you are proposing, it will not be. So that's the equation there, not the alternative that you offered.
Yep, so yes, true, if you remove a car park and you put green space there, the car parks are not available to the community, but the green space is available to the community. And I and Camberwell Green are arguing that the green space has a greater value than limited car parking for the community. The pre-pandemic times wasn't actually even a car park that the community could use.
I'll leave it at that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Watson, you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Boyle, for your presentation. You mentioned the community, and I wondered whether in arriving at your vision for the space, you consulted the community because, as I hear it, it seems to be a community of one stakeholder, which is the Camberwell Primary School.
I'm sorry, I just have a point of order. I'm uncomfortable with us interrogating a community member who's just here to present their view. I don't think they necessarily have to have information, for instance, about greenhouse gases or about other views. I think she is presenting a view, and I think we need to be quite careful with our questions that we're respectful of that.
I think my understanding is Councillor Watson was trying to understand how she'd formed that view. So we'll allow this question, but I just ask people to be a little careful with their questions of presenters. Thank you, Councillor Watson.
Do you need me to repeat the question?
Look, maybe briefly.
Yeah, so you, Ms. Boyle, you used the word community, and what I'm trying to understand is in the forming of the vision that Camberwell Green Association has, how much of the community did you consult? Because what I'm hearing is a community of one stakeholder, which is the Camberwell Primary School.
So there are a wide variety of people and organisations that support Camberwell Green. Our mailing list has more than 200 people on it, and they are not all members of Camberwell Primary School. Certainly that is a significant subset of the people who have been involved with Camberwell Green, but it's not all those people. We have support from a variety of other schools, including Genazzano. We have Camberwell Traders Association. We have the Victorian National Trust. So there's actually a lot of other stakeholders who are involved and interested and passionate about this project as well. Camberwell Historical Society is another organisation that is very keen on our work.
Thank you. One more question about the car parking. You mentioned that the teachers of Camberwell Primary School used the car park and paid commercial rates, and that you believed that they were okay with that agreement ceasing to happen. Has that been a formal communication between the school and your organisation? Is there something more than your belief, is what I'm wanting to understand?
Could I please suggest that you redirect that question to Camberwell Primary School President or Vice President? The Vice President will be speaking. I would prefer not to speak on the behalf of somebody else. Happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms Ball, for your presentation. And I must acknowledge too, I did receive a call from you, a missed call that I haven't returned today, and I've been incredibly busy, so I apologise for that. Just wanted to talk about the use of the car park. I understand you're talking about pre-COVID as opposed to now. Interestingly, I was actually at an event today here at Council. It was the Prayer for Reconciliation, a multi-faith event. Were you actually at the school today, or were you parked in the car park or on Reserve Road today?
No, I wasn't parked in the car park on Reserve Road today.
Right. So around 3 o'clock, when the event was held...
You've got a question coming?
I have got a question.
Thank you.
The car park was actually full, and it was with the majority of people attending the event. And I wanted to ask you, when you talked about whenever you looked at the car park, it was always council stickers. Are you talking about just during school hours or specific school days?
I'm talking about the school hours when I would come to get a car park there. So, yeah, well, like usually I would have been there 2:30 to 3:30, that sort of time.
At that time, yes. Look, thank you for that. Are you aware that the car park is used for school holiday programs when there's library events on, immunisation, when there's vaccinations being done on infants, when we have the Boroondara Community Plan? That car park actually services...
We got a question?
Several buildings here. Were you aware of that?
I would assume that would be the case.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I can't... Councillor Biggar.
I guess it's really, for me, not a question to Ms Boyle right now, but again, for us as we're moving forward, that I have a question, I suppose it is for you, Chair, about whether or not our questions need to be to the content that the person is presenting and not the broader argument. I think we need to be careful with that.
Okay, I think we've all heard what you've said. Thank you. Thank you. So, Ms Boyle, I don't think there are any more questions. Thank you very much. If you'd like
Thank
to
you for your
return.
time.
Thank you. Now, our next speaker is Mr Brendan Black. If you'd like to come forward, please. Mr Brendan Black? Not here? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to the next speaker. Thank you. So our next speaker is Ms Catherine Boyle. If you could please come forward. And yes, just at the end there, thank you. And if you could start with your name and address, interest in the matter, and whether you support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name's Katie Boyle. I live at Unit 3, number 29, Carramar Avenue, Camberwell. I'm a long-term resident of Boroondara. I've lived and worked in Boroondara for the last 12 years. I don't have children. I don't have children at Camberwell Primary School, so my interest is more from a personal point of view of I'm very keen on extra access for open space to members of the community in Boroondara. I have been reading the officer's report, and I noted that the recommendations said that the Boroondara Open Space Strategy of 2013 said that no need has been identified for extra public space at this place at this time. But I went to that strategy, and I'd like to read a paragraph from that report. In respect to the Camberwell area, its precinct recommendations. The majority of these gap areas coincide with areas of forecast change, with one of the key locations being the Camberwell Junction Activity Centre. Higher density residential and non-residential development in and around this centre is forecast to continue. Additional local and small local open space is recommended to cater for the forecast change and provide for the existing population. This is from the Boroondara's own report on its open space strategy, and it seems to be inconsistent with the officer's recommendations not to support the park. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all you had to say. Thank you very much. I can't see any lights on, so thank you for your presentation. If you'd like to return to your seat, thank you. Now our next speaker is Mr. John Pizzuto. If you would like to come forward, and welcome.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I don't oppose all of the recommendations, but I just wanted to make a few points very respectfully, because I think I have appeared, Chair, before you before on this subject when I was the member, and you know my support for Camberwell Green. I make the following comments, understanding that as councillors you have a bundle of very complex issues to work through, so I'm not oblivious to those challenges that you have on all those things. I'll come to my two main points in just a moment, but just for the gallery's benefit and new councillors' benefit, just to briefly reiterate why I support this project. A number of the reasons have already been traversed before me, but I would add to those comments that I've always seen, and the reason I worked closely with Camberwell Green from the get-go was because I see this space and this precinct as having enormous potential to serve as kind of, amongst all of the other obvious and more immediate needs in education for Camberwell Primary School and immediate public space, it would also be an important long-term public asset, a grand civic space, if you like, that constitutes that grand outdoor civic space to match the grand indoor civic space of the Hawthorn Arts Centre, one of Melbourne's best buildings in my view, arguably one of the country's best buildings and complexes. There's a whole lot of reasons around it. So I think, adding to those things that have already been said, I would add those things. I just really come to the 2 points I wanted to make tonight. The first one is that in terms of council's posture towards the government, the state government on this, can I just offer for consideration maybe some alternative views to some of those which are explained in the officer's report, and I do acknowledge their work. They've gone to a great deal of length, and I've read their report. The first thing is, I think they're correct. The government can move on this. Ministerial prerogative in relation to 113C and parliamentary approval in relation to 113D, government can do it in a heartbeat. So it's probably going to happen, and in my view, it should happen because I support the project. So then the question becomes, how can you best secure the government's support for what you need to deal with, which is very difficult? And I would offer this suggestion because it might help you in your discussions and the discussions that officers have with representatives of the state government. Go back, as some of you who were there might recall, to Sunday the 14th of October 2018, a few weeks before the last state election. There was a launch of Camberwell Green. I know that because I helped organise it. All of the candidates, myself then included, were asked pretty much point blank, do we support this project as originally conceived by the Camberwell Green Group? Everyone, including the two members present here tonight, said yes. I said yes. So you can go into your discussions with the state government knowing that there were commitments given to fully fund this project. And I think that might help you in your negotiations. But I support the project wholeheartedly.
Thank you very much. I can't see any lights on. Any questions? So thanks you, Mr. Pizzuto. Now our next speaker is Julianne Jacques, Dr. Julianne Jacques. If you could come forward, please. And again, if you could give us your name and address and interest in the matter and whether you support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Julianne Jakes. My address is Akron Avenue in Camberwell. I do not support any but the first recommendation. My interest is as a community member, a soon-to-be former parent at Camberwell Primary School, a former member and treasurer of the Camberwell Primary School Council, and my name also appears on the website of Camberwell Green as a committee member. I begin by commending the state government and our local members John Kennedy and Nina Taylor for the initiative, foresight and strength they've shown by granting $1.765 million to deliver the full Camberwell Green vision. Camberwell Green chooses gardens and trees over a car park. It favours cutting carbon dioxide emissions. Boroondara Council has shown environmental initiatives with its rubbish disposal and encouraging library visitors to use public transport. Consistent with this, they should support Camberwell Green. As former state government member John Prosciutto, who's just spoken, said many years ago, eventually it will happen. It is the future. Camberwell Green is the perfect example of think global, act local, and I encourage our councillors tonight to show the leadership required. Now's the perfect time because COVID-19 has changed the workplace forever. Council employees are working from home and there is no longer so much need for the Western car park. We should be very clear about what has brought us here tonight. The car park is situated on state crown land and Boroondara Council simply manages it for the state. The state can determine that its land be used for a particular purpose and can change a manager that refuses to follow that determination. On the 18th of November 2019, this committee met and resolved to not support Camberwell Green and to, I quote, not support the funding and ongoing maintenance of public open space at the Western Car Park in the event the state government determines to convert the Reserve Road car park to public open space, unquote. In moving this motion, the councillor who moved the motion said that the motion was about not giving false hope. He said that it was ultimately unlikely that the state government would fund Camberwell Green. That councillor was wrong and the state government is funding it. In seconding the motion, another councillor referred to the absence of the state government coming to the party. Well, the state government has come to the party. Importantly, in the very words of the 2019 resolution, this committee recognised that the state government can determine to convert the Reserve Road car park to public open space, and that is what the state government has done. But in light of Boroondara Council's resolved opposition, the state has no option but to appoint a new land manager, and the rational option is the closest state government entity, the Department of Education, represented by the adjacent Camberwell Primary School. Out of respect for Boroondara Council, the state government has asked it to transfer management to the Department of Education. Consistent with its 2019 resolution and the reasons for it, Council should do just that. Otherwise, the state government can simply take it away. I encourage our community leaders tonight to not be obstructionist and to agree to transfer Parcel 113C to the Department of Education. Any questions?
Thank you, councillors. I can't see any lights on, so yes, a late runner, Councillor Gold.
I had to ask one. Could I just pick up your last comment about transferring it to the Department of Education? There was a very salient argument put earlier this evening by one of your council members about the lack of open space and how...
I'm sorry, if I can just confirm there, you said one of your council members?
Your council members.
What do you mean by that?
Sorry, the first presenter tonight, can I just clarify that?
I understand Mr Stuart Lindsay
School
spoke,
Council
who is
President.
the School Council President,
Yep.
but I didn't understand one of your council.
Oh, sorry.
I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
I'm not a member of the School Council of Camberwell Primary, but
my
I was a
apologies.
former member of the School
My
Council.
apologies.
And I am currently a parent of
That's
a
fine.
student at Camberwell Primary in grade 6.
My
I have also
apologies.
had 3 other children go through Camberwell Primary.
I will
But my interest in the matter in 6 months' time is simply as a community member. And as I said, I am a supporter and have been for a long time.
Thank you. I'll rephrase the question. An earlier speaker tonight mentioned the need for open space for the school and that opening up the space that's currently occupied by a car park would bring you up to the standards of many other schools. Your final comment tonight said you support this land, the control of this land going over to the Department of Education. Are you concerned that in going to the Department of Education you could find much of that space covered in future school buildings? I'm not judging that either way, but I'm just saying, is there a concern along those lines?
My personal view is that that area should not be covered with buildings by the Department of Education. My view is that it should be public open space. I am aware that what was the former bowling green of the Camberwell Bowling Association has recently, I believe in the last 12 months, possibly in the last 2 years, been transferred to the Department of Education. Camberwell Primary now has sufficient land on which to build any further buildings should it wish to do so. I think it is marvellous that the state government has funded Camberwell Green to the extent of over $1.7 million. I think the chances of Camberwell Primary getting more money in the current state of affairs is very, very low to build any further buildings. I was treasurer of the school council when the last amount of money was given to Camberwell Primary. It ended up being over $1 million, and 6 classrooms were then built, including an area which can be 2 classrooms, which is currently used for the library. I'm not aware, with the presence also of the former Our Lady of Victory's parish school that is now leased by Camberwell Primary, I'm not aware and cannot envisage at the current time that Camberwell Primary actually has a need for further buildings. I don't see it as a significant risk. I agree that the buildings, if required, should not be built on this land, but I also say that it's no longer an issue for Boroondara Council, because with its last resolution, Boroondara Council referred this issue to the state government. It's now an issue for the state government. That's why I support item 1. I do not support item 4. Boroondara Council in 2019 took away any interest it had, I consider, in this issue.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no further lights, so thank you for your presentation, Dr. Jarks. Thank you. So the next speaker is Ms. Joanna Guacamazzi, and my apologies if I haven't said that correctly. And if you could please give us your name and address and interest in the matter.
Yes, sure. No problem on my last name. It's often difficult for many people. My name is Joanna Giacomazzi. I live at 13 Kasuka Road in Camberwell. I am here today as current Vice President of the Camberwell School Council, and am looking forward to the opportunity to speak to you tonight about why we as a school are advocating for more green space. As a resident of the Junction Ward myself, I understand we live in an increasingly congested area which requires managing many competing demands. I have read in the officer report references to the Boroondara Open Space Strategy written in 2013 that said there was not likely to be demand for additional open space in the area until 2031. The combination of our increasing enrollments and our small footprint means that there is a very real current need for open space for the local children attending Camberwell Primary today. Growth in Boroondara has been accommodated through an increasing emphasis on higher density residential development in Camberwell Junction. This has directly impacted school enrollments. In 2010, we welcomed 450 students. Today, we have 660. That's a 45% increase. That number is forecast to increase again, and with more of our students living in apartments, we feel we will be particularly impacted. School collected data show that of the current grade 6 students, 33% live in apartments and units, compared to 50% of the current foundation class. Our location is unique and means we have a density ratio twice that of all other primary schools in Boroondara. We understand we will never have the space of the more suburban area schools. However, the Camberwell Green Project will help lessen many of our current challenges. Current research tells us that time for outdoor play is diminishing, children are increasingly leading more sedentary lives, and the resulting negative effects in health and well-being. In parallel, we are learning of the developmental benefits of outdoor free play, allowing children to experiment, solve problems, and think creatively, as well as develop skills such as self-esteem, autonomy, and competence, all important critical elements of a primary school education. Given the time children spend at school, Schools have a responsibility to help children develop a healthy lifestyle. Our numbers and physical limitation make this an ongoing challenge. The current configuration of the school constrains not only physical education classes and inter-school sports, part of the Victorian curriculum, but also limits play options during school recess. We would like to thank the Victorian State Government for understanding our unique set of circumstances and granting nearly $1.8 million to create the valuable green play space. As a local school, our strong wish is to build connections with our community and to share the space out of school hours. I'd like to note that the VSBA, as project manager,
You could just wrap up.
one sentence, shares our vision. On their website, they specify that their objective is to transform schools, but also to transform the neighborhoods they live in by including sports, cultural, and other facilities that can be shared with the wider community. Camberwell Primary looks forward to working with all stakeholders to realize a green space project that will benefit not only our school families, but the greater community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't see any lights, so thank you for your presentation, Ms. Guacamasi. Thank you. Our next speaker is Miss Lauren Pant, I think it is. Thank you. And again, if you could give us your name and address and interest in the matter and whether or not you support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. My name's Lauren Pant and I'm a long-time Boroondara resident and I've been a volunteer on the Camberwell Green Committee since it began. My address is 23 Nan Street, Ashburton, and I'm against this recommendation. I'm an avid cyclist and I love how being outside with fresh air and exercise benefits me and my family, as well as also being a great mode of transport. I'm really concerned about the climate and fully support any changes that may enable us to move away from cars and towards walking, cycling and public transport. Boroondara Council workers are so lucky to work in a place where there are so many options for this: trains, trams, cycle paths and more. There really is little excuse for the majority of people to drive to work daily when they're working here. Supporting Camberwell Green gives a powerful message demonstrating your leadership in moving away from the importance of car parks and towards the importance of green space. It also aligns with the Council Plan and the Draft Climate Action Plan. As you know, Camberwell Green is supported by the state government, in particular John Kennedy and Nina Taylor, and also by a vast array of local residents, as evidenced by the petition conducted in 2018. I really would like to know how Boroondara Council can continue in good faith to give preference to a car park over parkland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can't see any lights on, so thank you very much for your presentation, Ms. Pan. Thank you. Our next speaker is Ms. Danielle Conquest. If you could please come forward. And again, name and address and interest in the matter. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. I also had a slide to put up. Is that going to be shown? Yep. Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone. My name's Danielle Conquest and I'm a member of the Camberwell Green Steering Committee, and I have been since we started. I reside in the Junction Ward and at Avenue Road, Camberwell, and I've lived in Camberwell basically since I was 5 years old. And I don't support the officer's recommendation on this issue. In 2020, the Camberwell Green Steering Committee sent out a survey on Camberwell Junction's historic park to all the candidates that were contesting the 2020 Boroondara local government ward elections. Candidate and now Councillor Di Gillies contested the ward made, can I see the...
I think, can I just pause for a moment and
sure.
seek some governance advice on this? Okay, it's just been suggested that if you could focus on your reasons rather than being
This is
too
my reasons,
concerned.
as I voted for this person. Due to this reason, I would have voted for another candidate if I had known that this person was not... Can I just finish what I was saying, because you've kind of thrown me as well?
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Thank you. So, I'm not pointing the fingers at anyone, I'm just asking a question. I'm just asking because we received this survey back and it was said, do you support the restoration of the historic park established in 1869 in the heart of Camberwell Junction, which was for a century a public park for local residents and an outdoor play space for the local school children? And Di Gillies' response was, this is a rare opportunity.
Point of order, Chair. This presentation appears to me to be directed towards either embarrassing or in some other way singling out an individual councillor, and it's simply not appropriate. Just as the governance rules make it clear that questions, for example, can't be put in the event that they're designed to embarrass a councillor, nor can presentations be put. So if the presentation is going to continue down this path, then the Speaker ought not to be heard further.
Okay, so if I could ask that it be removed from the screen, and if you could return to why you do or don't support. Councillor Watson, did you have a query?
My sentiments were exactly expressed by Councillor Park.
Okay, thank you. So if you could just go back to telling us what you feel about this, rather than what you think other people feel about it.
Okay, fair enough. Well, personally, I'm confused with the whole situation. We've been running this campaign and trying to communicate with all of you for a very long time. I am a nature advocate. I'm a bush kindergarten teacher. I see the future for our children and the community as giving them as much green space as possible. As before, all the people that have spoken today are on the same board. It is about the environment. I cannot understand why any council member here does not support it being turned into a green space when it is the future of the world. Car parks are not. I'm telling you, in 10 years' time, the cars will be driving themselves and they'll drive back to their homes, so nobody will need a car park. And people are very willing to walk and use public transport. That is my ideal, and I'm sorry if I offended Di Gillies, but she did say, as was stated, what was up on the board was she did support the proposal that we have spent a lot of time, and you as our representatives should be supporting us. We are your community who vote you in. Thank you. Any questions?
I can't see any, thank you. So thank you for your presentation, Ms Conquest. Now, our next speaker is Dr. Michelle Horn. If you could please come forward. And again, if you could give us your name and address and interest in the matter. Thanks, Ms Horn. Dr Horn, sorry.
Horn, and I reside in Nelson Road in Camberwell. Thank you, Chair, councillors, observers and officers, as well as the members of Parliament here today. When I moved to Camberwell, I had small children. I attended this building to go to the library. I attended this building to have vaccinations and other activities part of my community. You know where I didn't park when I brought my car? I didn't park in that car park over there because it was full. And I refer councillors to the report submitted to council where there is, hang on, I'm going to bring up my screenshot of the report so I can actually quote you, because I know that that's much more useful than vague statements, so bear with me for a moment. So there were 78 two-hour spaces, primarily used for staff of City of Boroondara whose staff parking permits override time limits, according to the report that we have here. Councillor Stavros earlier asked a question about I forget the exact word of your question, Councillor, but about how much that car park was used during school hours, by councillors, and there was a subsequent question about who was using the car park at 3 o'clock at some time this week. In 2019, when this report was made, that was pre-pandemic, every single day that car park was full, and as a member of the community, I've never parked in that car park because there has never been an opportunity to until this pandemic. And actually, I think that's the reason why the community feels so strongly about this. It's been put as part of the recommendations that because the existence, sorry, which bit I need to talk about?
Do we need to put it up a little?
No, I'm not sure it's there. It's on a different part of the recommendations from the report. It was stated that the use of the land, if it was shared with the school during school hours, wouldn't be available to the community. But I put it that this land has not been used for a use available to the community, so to speak, for many, many years prior to this. And so that is a status quo. So the idea that using the land only out of school hours is exactly what's been happening up until this pandemic. Happily, with the pandemic, there has been a change in use profiles. And so the needs for the councillors to have, not just the councillors, but the council workers to have car park there has significantly changed during that time. And I'd also draw council's attention to the draft Climate Action Plan, which recently gave many recommendations, including increasing canopy and decreasing reliance on cars by council workers. And I see that there's a possible future where visitors will be able to use that car park because there are less council workers needing to be there. I'm a medical practitioner, and there's a lot of research about the value of canopy and the value of green space. I quote, "Contact with nature is thought to play a crucial and irreplaceable role in brain development." There was a study published just this last month by Melbourne looking at greenery around primary schools and how it improves students' academic performance. I'm happy to forward.
Do you want to just finish your sentence and then wrap up?
The papers, and there was an improvement in academic performance with respect to difference in surrounding greenness, partly mitigated by traffic-related air pollution. There are many other fascinating studies about outlooks requiring canopy, not just open space. So the grass that we have out there doesn't fulfil the need for greenery, doesn't fulfil...
I need you to
Okay,
wrap up.
thank
you very much.
Any questions?
Can't see any lights, so look, thank you, Dr. Horn. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now, I believe this is our last speaker. We don't appear to have any forms, so it's Pia Sark Aken Aras. I'm really sorry, I can't say the last name. If you'd like to come forward and say it for us. Thank you very much. So if you'd like to give us your name for my benefit as well and give us your address and the interest in the matter. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Priya Sakakarasi Prapai. So I live in 90 Camberwell Road, Hawthorne East, just right across the road from Black Road. My view as an individual, so myself...
Could you just go a little bit closer to the microphone? I'm sorry, we're having...
No, that's okay. I lived here not long ago. I moved here because of my son wanted to attend the Camberwell Primary School. Oh no, my wife wanted my son to get in to that school. And I see that I would like to participate in this one. So my background is as a building designer, and I got a few restaurants around this area by myself. And I see the view of the car parking is, I talked to a few friends, that's parents at the kindergarten. The car park will be used for the pick-up and drop-off, which is, for my view, I quite like to see the parking to turn to be a green space. I like the idea of that one. I like the idea of close off the reserve road. I think it's opposed to one of the recommendations. I like to see the school that can make use of another public open space closer to the Camberwell Road. I don't know you're concerned about that part or not. I don't have any data. I don't have any politics in the background. But I just want to share my views. That's pretty much what I want to see. Because there's a public parking next to the tennis court, like on that triangles, it's a public zone. And I thought that is closer to the Camberwell Primary School main building. And I think that probably more appropriate in terms of if the building going to go there, or it's going to be the outdoor activities for children, and would be safer. I would like to see the reserve road that to join to campus, the school together, would be safer for kids and things. I live around here. I travel and take my kids to play like silly plays around that area a lot. I don't see people using that garden because it's quite small. Because of the parking is being used, I don't know, during the pandemic, during lockdown, 5 kilometers, this and that, the parking actually being used by the children practicing riding bicycles. So I don't think that's the best use of the car parking. That's what I can see and sharing my views.
Thank you very much. I can't see any lights on, so thank you very much. If you'd like to return to your seat. Now, I'll return to the officers to respond to matters raised by the submitters. Mr. Costello, or I think our CEO, Mr. Storr, is going to respond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think most of the issues which have been raised tonight are in fact addressed in the report, so I will not cover them again. Just two observations I would make.
Having trouble hearing you. If you could, they're just having trouble hearing.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Two observations I would make. One is to confirm that the Boroondara Open Space Strategy does draw the conclusion there is no demand for additional open space in this location at this point. The independent report Council obtained for the initial decision on this subject also made the observation that at this stage no additional demand is seen in this locality, but that might change between 2031 and 2041. So there is some prospect that as density increases in the locality, there may well be more demand for open space. There is, of course, an existing open space area both surrounding the school and right beside the car park at this point in time. That existing open space, which is right beside the car park, has very low levels of utilisation. It is, however, there. And I have discussed with the school the possibility that it might like to use that space more actively, given its low level of utilisation to date. So that space does exist. The second point I would make is in relation to the car parking. And as has been pointed out this evening, the staff do park in that car park. There is no question about that. I might just make the observation, though, as to how that car park came into existence, because I think it's important background information to understand. And it is that a study was done of this whole precinct in relation to council's activities to understand what under the planning scheme would be the appropriate parking requirement for council's activities, and that is for staff and visitors to this precinct. What the study showed was that there's a requirement of 457 car parking spaces to meet the needs of this precinct if you were to apply the planning scheme requirements as they would be applied to any developer who might approach this council for a permit. We have 355. So what that tells us is that we actually have a deficiency of over 100 car parking spaces in this locality to meet the needs of both staff and visitors to it. That's the situation we have. The other factor which really contributed to the car park being created in the first place, in the form in which you now see it, is that council made the decision a few years ago to relocate all of its Hawthorn staff to this campus. There were more than 200 staff who were relocated to this site as part of that. The building was refurbished and most of those staff went into what we call Building 3, which is where the Camberwell Library and the offices are located. If you just apply the planning scheme to Building 3, the parking requirement to meet its needs is 139 spaces just for that building alone, and the staff who have moved across from Hawthorn. The Reserve Road car park we're discussing tonight has 86 parking spaces in it. It is significantly short of what would have been required had a developer come to council and said, I want to build that very same floor space. Significantly short of that mark. However, the council took the view at the time that it should do as much as it possibly could to apply to itself that which would normally be applied to a developer coming before it for a permit. So that car park was very much a response to those demands and that attempt. It's of course open to council to form the view that it doesn't want to retain it. And indeed the state is making that decision for you. But I do think it's important to understand that the parking in the locality here is going to be deficient. There are 25 spots allocated to teachers in that same car park area. So what you're going to have is a number of teachers and those staff who continue to drive parking in the surrounding residential network where they're able to find spaces. But I just thought it was important to understand the car park is there for a reason. That reason is this council applying to itself the same rules it would apply to any developer who walked in the door seeking a permit for the same type of floor space. And I make that observation purely to assist those who are wondering why that car park is there and why we would even bother to think about it being an important opportunity and or alternative to the open space which has been provided. I'd also just make the observation that in relation to the question as to whether this open space meets the expectations which were put to council some time ago by Camberwell Green, the challenge I think that they and we face is that, and we've heard it tonight, there were several descriptions provided of this space as a public park, public gardens, public open space. And I'm not quite sure how one can decide that a school playground open to the community, maybe after school hours and on weekends, actually delivers on any of those descriptions. That's where I think the challenge really lies. And so I guess I just wanted to be clear about where the point of difference might be between how we're looking at this space and how it was originally conceived. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, councillors. I think Councillor Gillies, your light is on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to foreshadow a motion at the right time, thanks.
Thank you. And you don't have any questions at this stage?
Not at this time, thanks.
Okay, we'll note that down. Thank you. Councillor Sinfield, I think your light was next.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a quick question for the CEO or officers, if they might be able to assist me. And I was wondering if you could help my recollection as to when the last request was received or how it transpired that, in fact, those 25 car spaces for the staff at Camberwell Primary were renewed. I recall it being renewed at some point, and who initiated how that transpired.
I think that within the last 12 to 18 months, actually, we had a request for renewal of the lease for at least part of that site. Part of it's covered by a lease, part of it by a licence. And certainly since this whole conversation began about the fact that there was no longer a need for any of that car parking, there has been a request from the school to renew access to those very same parking spaces.
Thank you. Thanks. You're right. Councillor Bigger, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you. I do have a few questions. So can I just check whether or not, apart from the Urbis report data, do we have any other data about use of the car park, for instance, between council officers versus CPS staff and others?
There is no doubt that the majority of the parking which takes place in this car park is council employees, which is partly in line with its original reason for being constructed. But yes, if that's the question you're asking, it is certainly the majority of access is by council employees.
I'm sorry, I just couldn't hear can you just clarify that last statement? I just couldn't quite understand it.
I thought you were asking me, can I confirm whether the majority of those parking in the car park would be council staff? If that's your question, my answer is yes.
Thank you. Sorry, I just didn't get the last line. I thought that's what you're saying. So I know there have been discussions, and certainly I I think, quite relevant. There was an article in the paper today about this, but in terms of council, and I know that this probably has not been a policy made, but have there been any forecasting done about what we think will be, for instance, the percentage of staff who will continue to work from home beyond the pandemic, and how you see that impacting on demand for that car park?
Yes, look, it's probably a little early to know. We are re-beginning our return to office process now as a result of the restrictions moving. Some staff have indicated they would like to work from home 2 or 3 days a week. Some staff have said they'd like to be in here on a permanent full-time basis. And that will, of course, change over time from one person to the next. So it's very difficult to forecast what the actual behaviour will be until people start to relive, if you like, that environment. I think that this does warrant, in fact, if the car park were to remain, what I would be saying to you is that there should be a further analysis of that very question once we get into some form of pattern again and we know what our staff are choosing to do. But right now it's a bit difficult to actually tell.
Thank you. I guess that takes me to one of the elements of the Urbis report that I felt wasn't really brought out in the officer's report, but I think is quite important about the whole element of the sort of their suggestion that there be a green plan. I don't know if that's exactly what they called it, but a green plan for staff going forward, particularly given the location of council with the 3 tram routes and 2 bus routes and 2. I mean, I'm sure this must be something that we are looking at.
Yes, we in fact have a number of incentives already in place to try and encourage staff to use public transport, and certainly I acknowledge the point which has been made about there being a number of alternatives available in this location. We have exactly the same discussion with the Traders and the Shopping Centre Association about their employees, and the response which we always get when we have that conversation is that because of the radial nature of Melbourne's public transport network, it doesn't actually suit a number of people to use the public transport which is available to come to this location. So I think over time that will change for a variety of reasons, also including potentially the way in which Council decides to proceed with the Climate Action Plan, which has been mentioned tonight.
Yep, that's right. Certainly they seem to be advocating for a mode use shift. And one more question. Thank you, Chair. And this is just really probably to clarify my understanding, or lack of understanding, but of the Boroondara open space policy or plan, and how we determine, I guess, I understand the report, Urbis did say that they saw no additional demand, but I guess for me, one of the things I wonder if that would have to be compared to something else, right? Meaning, it would have to be, they're saying that they saw no demand, and that was some years ago, but no demand in this area if you were going to spend money on it, presumably. But if they have to look at it compared to what? And so I suppose, for instance, tonight it seems to me we're comparing it to a parking lot, and that's not necessarily, is that considered in the, do you understand my question? Are we looking at it at a per dollar per hectare basis? Then it might not weigh up versus use of something, of another use relative to the open space. A terrible question, I apologize.
So largely, the way in which these analyses are completed is to, first of all, understand the quantum of open space you already have available in the city. Secondly, to be looking at the population forecasts in the age profile, the demographic profile, which will tell you what the demands for different types of open space are likely to be. So that analysis has formed the background to the Boroondara Open Space Strategy. And what we've done is to look across the whole of the city at the open space provision and recognise that some areas have much greater access to public open space than others, particularly having regard to the likely demand which is going to take place in that area, or which in fact may already be present. So it's a relative consideration, if you like. There isn't a magic number. There are various views about what adequate provision of open space is across metropolitan Melbourne. But what we've done is to look at the open space provision across the city, look for those areas which have the lesser quantum of open space available to them, consider whether they are areas which are going to experience more growth, and from that be able to identify that there is a lack of open space available. What the Urbis report is really saying, and what the open space strategy is really saying, is that if you look at the amount of open space in the junction area at the present time, it's considered to be adequate to meet demand. But if the junction densifies and there are more and more apartments built in this locality, then you would need to revisit that. And that's really what's being foreshadowed there.
So it's compared to other areas of Boroondara, and that we're talking about in terms of whether or not the open space strategy prioritizes this area, but it doesn't, and one could assume there's going to be densification. But it doesn't, obviously we haven't looked at the impact of COVID because that's too recent, on the demand and the priority that people place on open space, right? Because that has to be balanced against that, and one could certainly suggest that that demand has increased.
I think that's a really important issue, that it may well be we see a remainder of the behaviour we experienced during COVID-19, where the community actually chose to use our parks in unprecedented numbers, which was fantastic to see. Not such an easy task to maintain them in that circumstance, but certainly great to see the use. And if those behaviours continue on post-COVID, whatever post-COVID looks like, then it may well be that we do need to have another look at the open space strategy and say, well, what assumptions do we need to change here? That's a possibility over that period of years.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question regarding the open space requirement for the precinct and the impact that it has on that this deficit of car parking spaces has on the surrounding area. I'm not the ward councillor, and I'm not directing the question to the ward councillor, but to the CEO, is this an area where we have large amounts of traffic overspill? I know that anybody who has a school in their zone, which we all do, knows that they have huge impact on surrounding streets and roads in terms of traffic and parking, particularly during pick-up and drop-off. My question is, with the existing deficit and of car parking required for the precinct, plus the impact of a further reduction, what might that look in terms of traffic and parking for the local area? And is it severely impacted at the moment? Sorry for the clumsy question, Philip.
No, that's quite okay. Pre-COVID, I think it was around 2016 or 2017, a study was done. Mr. Hondrakis will probably be able to take us through the figures. My recollection of that study is that a parking survey was done in the locality. The parking survey showed that there were areas surrounding this precinct where the utilisation level of the available car parking was at around 92 or 94%, which is very high utilisation. And if you look at the hours between 8:30 and 5, you generally had utilisation levels well over 80-odd% and certainly into those low 90s. I might ask Mr. Hondrakis if he could perhaps just confirm that what I've recalled is correct, because that was some time ago now.
Through you, Madam Chair, look, that is correct, and we did some further studies and we found that it was in the order of 30-odd staff would park on the residential streets and rotate their vehicles every few hours, so there is definitely that overflow parking in that precinct.
Thank you. That answers your question. Have you got a further question, Councillor?
No, I don't. Thank you very much. I just forgot to do my light off.
Thank you. Councillor Gillies.
Thank you, Chair. Am I on?
Yep.
May I speak to the motion now? Thank you.
Sorry, just a question for the officers. Have you got
no,
any?
that was from, sorry, was it still on? Was
Yeah,
it?
I'm
That was
sorry.
from the previous,
Yeah,
right.
okay.
I'll wait
So
until
we're
you're
still
ready.
on questions. Councillor Hollingsworth has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for the CEO, if I may. Has the VSBA Department of Education or any of the elected state members approached you to discuss possible parking solutions in an endeavour to help facilitate Camberwell Green? For example, supporting underground car parking?
No, they have not.
Thank you.
That answers your question. Yep. Councillor Stavrey, you have a question?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. It's for the CEO, Mr. Storer. Just on the parking question, I know we've spoken about future needs, but do you envisage any other needs from, obviously, there will be studies about post-COVID world and how the mix of working from home and working at the office will work for council, but are there any other sites that potentially would be amalgamated back here and would get an increase of potentially council officers that are not working in this particular campus and that would potentially have other overflow that we haven't envisaged?
No, there's no intention to bring other staff back into this campus.
Thank you. That appears to have exhausted the questions. So, Councillor Gillies, you foreshadowed that you'd like to move a motion? The light.
Yes, please, Madam Chair. If we could put that on the screen, I'd appreciate it.
And we'll just check. Now, do I need to read all of this out? Because I'm concerned whether people can see it. Are people able to see it? I think it's only a little modified. So I'll just check whether we have a seconder for that motion. Councillor Park, you're happy to second?
I am, and might I suggest if we maximise the view, that would assist, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
I mean, it can be scrolled through, then people can read it.
Can I just pause to make sure everyone can see it? Can everyone in the gallery see what's up on the screen?
I need to roll it up.
And we need to just roll it up a little bit, and we'll pause again. And that's the bottom of it? Yes, thank you. Okay, so we have a mover and a seconder. To assist Councillor Gillies and Councillor Park, is anyone opposed to this? Councillor Biggers opposed and Councillor Gold? Thank you. So I'll return to the mover. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, I'll thank the officers for a very comprehensive report, as well as thanks to all the people who've taken the time to come out tonight and speak to us. We do appreciate that. Now, I've reflected on the different perspectives from a variety of parties, some of whom we've heard from tonight. The school. Now, I absolutely understand the need for space. It's been jam-packed for years, and that's not likely to reduce. Partly that's a real credit to the long-standing successes of an excellent educational program. As a past Camberwell parent and school council president, I am sympathetic to the school's needs. Space is at a premium for classrooms and for play spaces. I can't help but note, because it's been a long-standing issue, that the staff car parking allocation on the Crown land can be expected to be an ongoing need. Teachers can't move their vehicles easily during the day. We know that there are good school council arrangements in the past. I can cite the example of the use of Lower Reserve Road on the Camberwell frontage. Very successful relationship between council and school. I believe we too would welcome dialogue regarding Reserve Road, which is why we need to establish a position of council to take to that dialogue. Now, the Camberwell Green Association have a very well-intended and aspirational desire to see the asphalted Crown land converted from car park to open green space. Space available for public use outside school hours, as theoretically every public school is, even though they're not always that accessible. They've expressed a desire to work collaboratively with Council. We have a new iteration of leadership representing the group, and although I can't speak to the past, my interactions with those representatives would support that intent. I am very saddened that the intervention of political wheels brought into motion will now remove Council and every other stakeholder from decision-making. The opportunity to develop any meaningful collaboration, including Council, will not be there. Let's be clear, neither the school nor the Camberwell Green Group can guarantee how that land will be developed or laid out in time. Decisions will be in the control of a government department. If the government wanted to allocate this land to open green space, surely it would reserve it as parkland. I applaud the environmental comments by several presenters. However, that isn't the issue here. The issue is, what is our response to the VSBA questions? Let me remind you also that the government is not subject to planning regulations or permit applications. In fact, they've even taken away rights to appeal decisions. We know the government can re-reserve Crown land without Council approval. The stand we are looking at now is about perpetuity. That means time beyond us as a council, me as a councillor, the cohort of the school community. Is removing Council, the locally elected voice, a good thing? Can we draw any confidence that the government will listen to the wider community over time, or is it, frankly, a land acquisition for a government department? Therefore, I recommend this motion, which expresses resistance to the government taking management and any meaningful involvement away from Boroondara Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies. The seconder, Councillor Park, would you like to speak to your...
Not at this juncture, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other? Yep, Councillor Bigger, you'd like to speak to the motion?
Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Gillies. I see tonight as an opportunity for a win-win. I think our community has continually raised to us the absolute priority that protecting and increasing open space, and particularly green space, is for them. We've seen it across the municipality, most recently through the results of our consultation on the Boroondara Community Plan, where the community just emphatically stated their concern and desire for more green open space. I think that is an absolute, it's a voice that we've heard, and I think that all councillors would have to allow that. I think the community's asked for this, not only because they're spending more time here in Boroondara and more time outdoors in our parks and green spaces, but also because they're concerned about the impact of climate change on our city. They know that we need to be moving to decrease the heat island effect. They know we need to be moving away from driving and towards more sustainable forms of transportation. Fundamentally tonight, this is a discussion, I think, of whether we listen to the community, the voices we've heard here tonight, and that we've heard over the months and years, and we prioritize greater green open space, or we prioritize parking. Our commissioned report said that as Camberwell Junction continues to grow, so will the demand for green open space. Indeed, it has grown undoubtedly throughout COVID. We may not be able to measure it yet, but we will see that. And it's likely to be continuing. There was clearly support in the Urbis report for a reduction in the provision of parking in major activity centres which are well serviced by public transport. This is a prime example. We need to encourage mode shift away from car use. The Urbis report identified this as a prime area, Camberwell Junction as a prime area for that kind of mode shift. We are right at the heart of Melbourne's excellent public transport network, with the tram, 3 tram routes, 2 bus routes, and 2 different train lines within easy walking distance. I won't quote from a report, but clearly the report spoke specifically to well, I will actually. It's concluded in the report that while it may be appropriate to reduce off-street car parking, the reduction of such parking should not result in a shift of demand to on-street parking, which people did raise tonight, and I appreciate that. Instead, a mode shift appears the most appropriate outcome to manage available parking for various users of the civic precinct in this instance. So there shouldn't just be an assumption that if we close down this car park, that it will negatively impact on the amenity of neighbors. We need to think beyond that. That is 1990 thinking. This is 2021. This study was undertaken in 2016, though, which is 5 years, and 5 years is a long time in the current world. Since then, we have experienced the biggest change to work patterns in our modern history. A survey conducted by the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, reported in today's paper, if anybody read it, asked 50 of the nation's largest employers about their planned approach to working from home. The majority of these 50 largest employers said they expect to continue allowing employees to work at least part-time from home after the pandemic is over, and they expect that their employees will want to continue to work from home. Meaning demand for parking for council staff, because council staff are just like any other human beings and employees, it has already decreased dramatically. It is likely to continue to remain lower over time. In addition, council's approach to moving strongly to support a steep decline in both corporate and community greenhouse gas emissions means that we need to support alternative transport for our staff. Far fewer staff are going to the office, and with this hybrid model, it will mean a change. Some people have said that sharing this space with the school, between the school and the public, is not a good idea. I personally think it's the best of both worlds. I think it means that the green open space will be well used by the school during school hours. And I think we shouldn't forget that these children and families at CPS are our residents and our ratepayers as well. They are faced with a huge explosion in student numbers in the past 20 years. As I said, my own children attended the school when it was much, much smaller, and its own success has led to an increase. And the idea that there might be 850 students on that campus means that we have to think about the open space. But in addition to school use, after school, on holidays and weekends, this space will be bursting with use by the community. That is a benefit. That is exactly what we should be working towards, that the demand for spaces like this, we need to continue to work, that there's a positive opportunity to share facilities between schools and between the public, and that's how we need to be moving in the future, particularly in a place like Camberwell Junction where space is at a premium. So I also want to join with thanking the state government for committing $1.76 million, and particularly John Kennedy and Nina Taylor here tonight, for this much needed extra green open space in Camberwell Junction. In terms of the proposal we have before us, I don't see how we can say that we are opposed to the closure of Reserve Road when it has not been explored, when that data has not been put before us, when we have not had an opportunity to have full and appropriate conversations with the school. This has always been a road that had significant risks on it, and something we need to consider. So I support our commitment to providing something that our community is crying out for, more open space for our children and for all of us. And because of the climate, because the school wants it, because our community wants it, I cannot understand why we would not support this tonight.
Thank you very much. Now
Can I just clarify to say that when I say support it, not the motion.
We have a 3-minute too, so.
Yes, I do not support the motion, and if this motion fails, I have an alternate motion that I would present. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. Balancing the needs of the community is really challenging, and that's probably the biggest challenge of being a councillor, is trying to weigh up the competing needs and priorities of our community. And that's one of those difficult decisions that we need to grapple with tonight as to which community, if there is just one singular community that is more in need than another. So my comments don't make Councillor Biggar's comments not real and not worth acknowledging. It's just a counter-position. I echo Councillor Gillies' comments from earlier, and I encourage the state government also to reconsider the purpose for which they reserve or re-reserve this parcel of land. Green open space is lovely. What's not to like? Green open space is even more lovely 8 k's from the CBD. Because if we could all balance living in the inner city with having the lifestyle and enjoyment of living in rural or regional Victoria, I think most of us would probably choose to have an area that is less built up and more green and open. Who wouldn't want that, right? So we're all coming from a similar position, but we have these competing needs, and the school is just one cohort to consider. The community seeking the green open space through Camberwell Green as a body for their voice is just another. I won't move to 100% active or public transport. I just can't. I catch public transport here several days of the week, direct out of the CBD, here by public transport, train out of the city, trundle down on the tram, and then in reverse to try and get home. But I can't do it every time I come here because I have kids to pick up and I have kids to drop off at swimming lessons, or I have kids to pick up from tennis lessons, or I need to get to North Balwyn in 15 minutes from the junction to get at footy training. So it's just not possible to do it every time I'm travelling here. So while I personally choose a mixture of public, active and personal transport, I can't move my lifestyle and shift my personal diary to be 100% public or active transport. And I would suggest that I'm representative of our 1,200 staff or the school staff that also have competing priorities, and some days they may choose public or active transport, and other days they too have children or dependents to drop off and pick up. So I think the suggestion that the car park can just simply be evaporated and turned into green open space, and the need for parking of vehicles totally dissipated, is unrealistic in 2021. Albeit idealistic, it's unrealistic. So having evaluated the competing needs as presented tonight and over the past few years that I've been privy to these discussions, my position lies most similarly with Councillor Gillies, and I'll be supporting her motion tonight, and I encourage you to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I too echo the comments of Councillor Gillies, Councillor Biggar and Councillor Sinfield. I wholeheartedly understand Councillor Biggar's passion, and ideally it would be wonderful if we could convert into green space, but the reality is, rather than repeat everything Councillor Sinfield's just said, it's not feasible to do so. When we look at public transport alone, the tram system that we have here in Boroondara that would service this school, unfortunately, is antiquated. It isn't a facility that is easy access for people with disability or parents with pram. It's often difficult to navigate getting on and off the tram as it is. The train is quite a distance away, and I couldn't imagine too many parents encouraging their children to catch the train to school, walking on their own then from the station down to this junction area, carrying heavy school bags. As parents, as grandparents, and I do have 2 grandchildren at primary school, it is a challenge to drop off and pick up. And you've got band, you've got gym, you've got productions, you have parent-teacher interviews, you have grandparents stay. There is a constant need to take a vehicle to and from the school. Inclement weather is another example. Children with injuries. My granddaughter had a broken leg recently, and other options were just not available. Teachers, people that need to access the school for whatever the reason, there is a need for parking. And if we remove the open green space and convert it to parkland and use for activity and completely remove all the car parking from there, then we're also talking about the restructured Reserve Road or reducing parking in Reserve Road. Where do people park? It's just not feasible to proceed. I would welcome a conversation with state authorities to come and say, look, we support this process, we have funding to go towards it, but we acknowledge and understand there is a serious issue with where will people park their vehicles. The only way that I could see this being a feasible project if there was funding for underground car parking to replace what's there at the moment to ensure that not just catering for current needs, but for future needs. There's 660 students now, and speakers who spoke very eloquently tonight and very impassioned made it quite clear the school is in a growth phase. It's not stopping at 660 students. It could be 800 students, and we've got 400, 500 parents drop off, pick up and attending everything they need to do at the school. It's not feasible to rely on public transport. It's not feasible to presume every parent's going to walk with their child or cycle with their child. There needs to be parking provision. As Councillor Biggar said before, the Boroondara Community Plan was a wonderful example of talking about how we do value a sustainable society, how we do want to do more with climate mitigation. And to take vehicles off the road will be wonderful. To support electric vehicles is already an initiative that's happening. Autonomous vehicles may be something in the future, but we can't rely on not having car park for now. And even if there is a take-up of autonomous vehicles in 10 years' time, that doesn't necessarily mean that parents aren't still going to need to drive and park at school, nor teachers nor staff that work here at council facilities. On Burke Road, we have the Our Lady of Victory's Church. Weddings, Christmas events, musicals, recitals. As councillors, we've been fortunate to attend function there before. Where do the people park? They park in this very car park that we're talking about surrendering. There isn't adequate parking on Burke Road. There isn't parking on Camberwell Road. We need to ensure there's adequate parking before this car park is surrendered. And the only way to do that is to install underground car park. If the authorities wish to have a conversation about supporting that, that would be a very welcome conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Gold.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just start by saying in some discussions over recent months, quite a few months, there's been discussion about whether we should involve the community and the various panels we've got in advisory groups. And I think probably the person I first said this to is here tonight, but my view at that time was you have community representation. I represent the community. So does everyone else around this table. We are here as community representatives. Now look, I've gone through this fairly large report, and thank you very much to the officers for producing it. And it is very good. But clearly some of the information, I think, as Councillor Biggar has pointed out tonight, is a tad dated. But I was overwhelmed by one major thing that's missing. Consideration of residents. The residents I'm talking about are the students. There wasn't a great study in the Urbis report. There wasn't a great study on what was put to us today. Well, previously, I took a while to read it, about the needs of students and how we balance those. And Councillor Sinfield has said it is a balance. It is a balance. But I'm not seeing a lot of people standing up for the need of students. Now, a little bit earlier tonight, the first speaker, I was corrected in phrasing them that way, did actually give us some sort of measure of the open space that's missing in a school with this many students in it. And they said, and I haven't seen any evidence because it's not in the report, maybe the school haven't presented this to us, but that the area of the car park was roughly equal to the deficiency in open space that they were seeking. It was a very good measure, and I think we should consider our community in making our decisions. Now, absolutely, the other side of that argument is council's need for parking. And there's been a lot of discussion around this tonight, whether it's, the adequacy of it, we need to recalculate it, et cetera, the balance in the community. But I've got to say, I've read the VSBA, the rulings that have currently taken place and where we're heading. The way I phrased it in reading the report was the school have won. State government are taking it over. And I'm probably somewhat reflecting what John Pasuto said earlier tonight, that our time might be better spent working with that decision as a reality. It is a reality, and trying to find some concessions for the rest of the community, working with them. I know it's not usual for a school to share its open space with the community, but it's not impossible. And so I'd very much like to have seen us spend more time seeing if we could find common ground. And I must admit there's been lots of to's and fro's tonight, but I think there's elements of common ground from what we've said. That we all see an advantage of green open space, and I would rather see ourselves working towards doing it in such a way that it benefits the students of that school, their parents, and a much broader community of the area, and I think we can. I commend Councillor Gillies for producing an alternative motion tonight, and I largely support it. It's gone a long way down the track to what I think it should have been and could be. The only real bit I have an objection to is I think it is just too early to define what we're going to do about Reserve Road. It's designing on the run. It's us designing what someone else should be designing. I took the opportunity this afternoon to watch the pickup of the school. I haven't been a parent at that school, and I don't know what it's like, but there was large queues of vehicles down Reserve Road and out into Camberwell Road. And the car park, I don't know who was parking there, but there was a U-shaped line of cars coming in one side, going round and out the other side. They were all picking up children. Now, I think the comments that have been made about finding different modes of transport apply to the parents at the school as well, and I think that will change in time. But we should look at that, and we should consider our residents, the students and their parents, and find out how that school operates and make proper provisions. I think it's too early to say, we're not going to let you anywhere near Reserve Road. We mightn't, and it may not work. But I also know it's a shortcut for many people. I know certain people quite closely who use it as a shortcut all the time. That's not necessarily a healthy thing. So I think if we step back and say, we probably don't have much choice, this will become green open space for the students of this school, and they will be better for it. But I'd like us all to consider, as community representatives, how we ensure that those children safely get across that road and can use that space. And I think it's incumbent on us to do that. I don't mean tonight. I mean put some time into looking at how we can achieve that to the benefit of all through professionals that know what they're doing in that area. So I broadly support the motion, but I would not support the bit about making an early decision about Reserve Road. I'd rather that we got together with the school and with people who know how to do these things and work out how we give proper and safe access across that road to this reserve, which will become green space. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gold. Councillor Stavrou.
Thank you, Chair. I too am torn with the views that have been espoused tonight. I think I've heard my colleagues discuss about balancing the needs of the community, and this is precisely where I am. In one unfortunate way, that we're at council a little bit disadvantaged because we need to balance the needs of the community with information across the board, and we do that. That's why we have a climate action plan, we have an open space plan. And what I worry about is when there is a decision that's been pulled away from the local representatives and it is being defined and closed off for any consideration in the future as how things might evolve. And when I think about that, I do think about what Councillor Bigger said about, today's article, corporations are working from home, but I'd like to get it to stick a little bit more. I'd like to see how these things evolve a little bit in the future. If we all had a crystal ball tonight and we knew exactly what the future could bring, we would make better decisions. But as we don't, it's best to ensure that the decisions are made locally and do address the issues that we face in the local arena. There are overriding demographic challenges. I mean, we saw that the school has grown by 45%. That's an extraordinary growth, no doubt, to part of its program. But, with all due respect, I can't believe that's the only reason. There have to be some other demographic densification challenges that are occurring there. And unfortunately, when these challenges are brought from above, and we don't have the local ability to balance loads, so to speak. That makes things difficult. So I would like to ensure that we have more say locally, and I would fully support Councillor Gillies' motion tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Stavrou. Councillor Park, did you want to reserve your right and speak after Councillor Watson as the seconder, or are you happy to speak now?
I'm happy to speak now. Thank you, Chair. At the outset, I'd say that no one appreciates our parks more than I do, but it's been presented by some as a contest between parkland and car park, and really that isn't what this is about, and that'll be proved in the fullness of time, I'm quite sure. The use of car parking by council staff has also been put by some as if it's illegitimate, but I think it is important to remember that council's actually providing a service to the community. That service and the services require use of a fleet of vehicles. It's that simple. Councillor Bigger talks about encouraging a mode shift away from cars and points out the obvious, that the school's within easy walking distance and has great public transport. But yet, when you go to the surrounds of the school at the commencement of the day and the end of the day, it's bleedingly obvious to all that a great number of the parents simply don't avail themselves of those options. We're not just talking about in inclement weather, but it's simply, we don't see that use of the public transport or indeed the ability of walking to school. And I acknowledge that some of the issues that Councillor Hollingsworth raised are actually explanations for that, and perhaps if the state government had, in its fit of generosity, might spend some money upgrading some of our trams and some of our tram stops, then we might see a bit of a move towards that public transport for purposes like travel to school, which would be very welcome. We heard about the need to support alternative transport for our council staff. Well, great idea, and we've been doing it for years. So there's nothing new there. The students are certainly part of our community and numbered amongst our residents, but the cost shifting that we've seen in recent years from state government to local government ought to give us pause immediately to not be thinking that it's our province to go and solve all the problems of the schools. Heaven knows we've got more than most cities. The issue about Reserve Road, I think Councillor Gillies put eloquently, we need a position, and in fact we have a position. This is simply maintenance of the existing position, and it wasn't arrived at on the run. There's no designing on the run. This is an issue that has been considered by council previously, and we had opportunity to take all the advice we needed. So it's simply not true to put it in those terms. So I commend the motion that's been moved by Councillor Gillies.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've heard many statements tonight expressed, and if I could use a couple of words to sort of put them in two different buckets. We've heard statements that are aspirational and also statements that are idealistic. So we've heard many statements I would consider aspirational to describe what is wanted for the space as a grand civic space, turning back the clock and restoring an old garden, and how wonderful that would be. And we've also heard statements that I would describe as idealistic, where staff and parents are encouraged to use public transport and reduce carbon emissions. It's something that you hear often, and we have an expression in urban planning about not in my backyard. Well, a similar thing goes here. We want to encourage more people to use public transport, but we all drove here tonight. We also have an education department that has a very successful school, and as expressed by a member of the school community, they have fewer square metres per head of student in open space than others, and that's an education department, not a council problem, because we don't go and survey our schools and ask them if there's anything we can do to help improve that. But we do help. Many of our schools come and conduct activities on council-maintained ovals and so on, so that they can have open space play opportunities. So it's not like we do nothing in the space, it's that we do what we can, and that is certainly something that we do. Another factor tonight, and again this idea that we have to, well, it's not an idea, it's something we actually have to do, is to balance the interest of many, many stakeholders in the community. And in this particular instance, we are one of them. We've heard very loudly here tonight from one particular part of our community, and we certainly understand the needs that they have expressed and their aspiration for more open space for the children. But council itself is a major employer in the area, and we are a major provider of civic services to our broader community. And our CEO expressed very clearly that we have an obligation to provide ways for the community to access us, and one of those ways is through the provision of parking spaces, which are in great deficit as we understood the mathematics. We also have a large school community that has an enormous impact on the local residences, and we need to be very sensitive to not only the intended consequences, and we have a clear understanding of what the intended consequences are from the different groups, but it's also a responsibility that we need to weigh very carefully as to what the unintended consequences are. So having listened to the arguments around the table tonight and listened to the presentations that have been given, I will be supporting the motion brought forward by Councillor Gillies this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, councillors. I'll now return back to Councillor Gillies as the mover to close the debate.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all my colleagues for their input and their comments, and I do appreciate each and every one of them. There was nothing wrong in anything that was said tonight. It's just this balancing act. And just maybe to Councillor Stavrou's point regarding the crystal ball, if council has no place at the table, can anyone guarantee that the government will be listening to the local community? Because we do have the opportunity to be the local community's voice. And as I referred before in my remarks, the desire to have a collaborative working relationship with the community, I believe, is still there. It's our intent, it's the intent of community representatives we've heard from tonight, and probably others we haven't even heard from. But if we're not at a place at that table, who is really going to represent that? Because I can't guarantee the government will, can you? And just one more point regarding Reserve Road. I draw your attention to 6B, which to me articulates the intent for Council to have a position to take into a discussion. I don't see that as an immovable, rock-solid position. It's a point to take to conversation as far as I can see. So thank you, everybody. Thank you again to the people who've come out tonight to be a part of this dialogue. It is important, but we are here and we are accessible. So thank you very much. I move the motion, please, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gillies. So now I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? And those against? So that motion is carried. Thank you very much to everyone. Does anyone need a 5-minute break? I'm aware time's moved on. 5 minutes?
I move that we adjourn.
Thank you. And seconded?
Happily.
Thank you. Councillor Stavro, thank you. So we've officially resumed. Thank you. So we'll now move to item 3.2, which is the 2021-22 Round 1 Small Grants Biennial allocations, and this is going to be presented by Nicole White, Manager, Community Planning and Development. Thanks, Ms White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This report contains the recommendations of the assessment panel for the 2021-22 small grants, which are biannual, round 1 allocations. The small grants opened on Monday the 1st of March and closed on Sunday the 21st of March 2021. This grant category of small grants provides a quick turnaround on approvals for funding of small, new and once-off services, programs and activities which strengthen the Boroondara community. Small to medium not-for-profit community organisations and groups were able to apply for grants of up to $3,000 under 6 streams. The funding pool for the 2021-22 annual community strengthening grants, including the small grants, is $579,233, which includes a contribution from the Rotary Club of Balwyn and an allocation from Council, as well as rolled over funds from the 2021 annual community strengthening grants and the 2020-23 triennial operational grants. Funding will cover 2 rounds of small grants and 1 round of annual community strengthening grants. In line with the Boroondara Community Strengthening Grants policy, 25% of the annual community strengthening grants allocation is made to small grants, which is $144,808 for 2 rounds. The total funding pool for this round of small grants in 2021 is therefore $72,404. 42 applications were received and the total amount requested was $91,427.81. 40 applications, which you will find in attachment 1, were recommended by the panel for full or partial funding, totalling $83,450.80. The panel noted the increased number of applications to the small grants, which would previously have come through the annual community strengthening grants. Due to the annual community strengthening grants being underspent in previous years and the 25% allocation to the small grants biannual rounds being a nominal amount, the panel recommended allocating $83,450.80. Consideration can be given to revising the allocation to small grants biennial should the demand for these grants continue through round 2. It is recommended that the Services Delegated Committee resolve to endorse the small grants funding allocations for round 1, 2021-22, of $83,450.80 as outlined in attachment 1 as annexed to the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we don't have any speakers registered to speak to this item. So, councillors, are there any questions for Ms White? There appear to be none. Councillor Gillies, you're seeking to move a motion?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, when the time ready.
I think that's it. Yes. Yeah. The officer's recommendation is on the screen.
Recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Watson, your light's on to second.
Yep. Happy to second.
Thank you. For the benefit of the mover and seconder, is anyone opposed to that motion? No. So look, I'll return to Councillor Gillies. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The community organisations, these community organisations deliver really many important programs and services across Boroondara. Most of them are reliant on volunteers. Community grants are a really important way that council can help them. The small grants were introduced to provide a quicker turnaround process for those small to medium-sized organisations. The grants have proved very popular with a steady increase in the number of applications since they were introduced. In the context of bouncing back from COVID, it's been very pleasing to see community organisations planning projects in response to identified needs. We know that people are looking to connect with others. Social isolation is a major concern, and we have vulnerable members in our community that are supported by these organisations. All of that was reflected in the applications received. Groups are embracing new ways of staying in touch. These sorts of things were reflected in the requests. Equipment for grants, cultural festivals, sporting programs, some sort kindergarten outdoor equipment, and materials to support community development projects. I'd like to acknowledge the contribution of the Rotary Club of Balwyn, as they are an important partner in the grants program, and members of the assessment panel. I'd also like to thank my fellow panellists, Councillor Watson and Councillor Hollingsworth. I thank the staff, as the grants involve many staff from across departments, as well as community development support staff, who do a fantastic job coordinating and administering the program. So my thanks, and I commend the motion to my colleagues.
Thank you very much. Councillor Watson is the seconder.
No, nothing further to add, but again, thank Councillor Gillies for her remarks and the officers for the work and support they give us in the Small Grants Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gillies, I'm assuming you don't need to say any more to wrap up. Thank you very much. So I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. That's carried unanimously. Thank you. So item 3.3, consideration of public submissions, proposed amended governance rules, and that's going to be presented by Kirsten Ritchie, Governance Coordinator. Thank you, Ms Ritchie.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. On 24th May 2021, Council resolved that the proposed amended governance rules be endorsed for public consultation. The public consultation period commenced on the 27th of May and closed on 25th of June. The consultation process was advertised through public notice on Council's website, public notice in the Age newspaper, and the Have Your Say section on Council's website. The governance rules in their entirety went out on public display. However, the only proposed changes were to Division 8 public question time, Rule 54 to 56. Officers received 195 written submissions in relation to the proposed amendments. At the time of the agenda distribution, 12 submitters had requested to be heard in support of their written submission. We have now had one additional submitter request to be heard, bringing the total to 13. All written submissions, as well as the presentations heard tonight, will be taken into consideration when officers draft the governance rules that will then be presented to Council for consideration at the Council meeting held on the 26th of July 2021. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I believe we have 13 speakers, and if I could just remind the speakers of the 3-minute limit for talking, and that we would like you to give us your name and address when you come up. So if I could now invite Miron Mizrahi forward. No, not here. Thank you. E.J. Wise. I think that's a no. Okay. Dr. Jenny Mills on behalf of Humanist Society of Victoria. Just at the end there, yes. And if you'd like to take your mask off while you're speaking, I believe you can. Thank you, Dr. Mills.
I'm a committee member of Humanists Victoria, and our submission...
Could you possibly just give us an address to record?
My residential address is number 1, Kenilworth Street in Balwyn.
Thank you very much.
Our submission focused on Clause 18A of Council Governance Rules, which states that a prayer may be recited before the opening of council meetings. And we would like to make a recommendation about the current practice, which is to routinely use a Christian prayer. That council meetings in Melbourne be opened with a prayer was originally recommended by the Municipal Association Victoria in 1948. And the councils that previously made up the Boroondara city adopted that recommendation within a few years, and the practice has continued. However, in the 6 decades since 1948, there has been a great deal of demographic and cultural change. Based on the 1966 census, 88% of the Australian population were Christians. However, in the 2016 census, only 45% of the residents of Boroondara nominated that they were Christian, and there had been a decrease of about 7% in the 5 years since the 2011 census. By contrast, in the 2016 census, 37% of residents marked no religion, and the proportion of people in this category had grown by 50% between the two censuses. Apart from the census data, it's evident that the community is becoming more secular, in that in 2019, 80% of weddings were conducted by a civil celebrant, and more than half of all funerals as well. And perhaps this trend may be reflected within the council itself. For example, we're aware that when current councillors were sworn in November of last year, 5 made an affirmation and only 6 took an oath. In addition, Boroondara's demographic snapshot shows a significant degree of cultural diversity. Once again, based on the 2016 census data, we see a population comprised of people from 145 countries who speak more than 120 languages, and with respect to religion, 8% of the community have religious affiliations other than Christianity. In its work, Boroondara Council gives high priority to improving social cohesion and the mental well-being associated with that. So to conclude, while the use of a Christian prayer at the beginning of council meetings may be time-honoured, it does not really strike a welcoming note, and in view of the increasing cultural diversity and secularisation. And a change would not necessarily be groundbreaking, as some councils no longer use prayer, such as Macedon Rangers.
Could I ask you to wind up? Yes. Just another sentence, thank you.
Ganawara Shire in Kerrang has replaced the prayer with a declaration, and the Mornington Shire uses a pledge.
Thank you very much. I can't see any lights on, so thank you. If you'd like to... Oh, Councillor Franco, I am sorry, I didn't see the light.
Thank you. At the end of your submission, you were, I think, addressing some alternatives. I'm just wondering if there are alternative ways that you think the prayer could be handled, and if you'd like to...
Point of order, Chair. The purpose of questions is to clarify what has been said, not to give an extension, because that's clearly unfair to all the other speakers.
Would you like to try and turn that into a question related to what Dr Mills has said to us?
Yes, it was a question, and I disagree with Councillor Park's interpretation. I asked if there were alternative ways in which the prayer could be handled, and that's a question. Thank you.
Chair, I didn't say it wasn't a question. Clearly, Councillor Franco wasn't listening. The preamble to the question made it clear why the question was being asked.
I tend to agree with Councillor Park, but if you could just reply very quickly, Dr Mills.
Well, we did really want to make a recommendation that a more inclusive alternative could be considered by Council, such as a period of quiet contemplation or private prayer, or alternatively an affirmation that acknowledges the seriousness and moral intention of Council in its work of meeting the needs of the whole community.
Thank you very much. Councillor Franco, your lights, you're right now. Thank you. Thank you, Dr Mills.
Thank you.
Now our next speaker is Miss Lynn Webber on behalf of Lighter Footprints. If you'd like to come forward and state your name and address, please.
Good evening. My name is Lynn Webber and I live at 27 Frederick Street.
I'm here tonight to present on behalf of Lighter Footprints. Our supporter base of 2,500 members mainly consists of ratepayers in Boroondara. We are looking to improve the way that we and other community members can communicate with the council. I would like to address two matters. The first concerns archiving practice of documents made available to the public for council and delegated committee meetings. Current practice is for papers and minutes from past council meetings that are more than 2 years old to be removed from council website at the start of each calendar year. Council usually has several operational and capital projects that run over many years. If a community member is interested in the rationale behind the council decision concerning these ongoing projects, they'll be unable to find it. The cost of retaining the information on the council website is so small, we don't understand why it is removed. Most councils in this part of Melbourne retain information for far longer. We urge you to reconsider this practice and retain papers and minutes from council meetings for 10 years. The second matter that I want to raise concerns what has become the vexed question of questions. It is clear that council puts up barriers to the asking of questions at council meetings to the point now where most people don't bother to do so, as it's not an effective way to engage with council. Other councils in Melbourne take a completely different approach and actively engage in an open and ongoing two-way dialogue with their communities. We propose the following changes to the question process. Each questioner is allocated a maximum of 2 minutes for asking a question, and a preamble can be included in that question. 2, no requirement to lodge a question 10 days prior to the council meeting for questions that relate to matters not on the agenda. 3, questions can be asked at all public meetings of councillors. 4, no limit on the number of questions a person can ask over a year. 5, a maximum of 4 questions per person per meeting, limited by the next 2 proposed changes. 6, if a questioner is asking more than one question, then their second question is asked after all other questioners have asked their first question. 7, question time is allotted to a maximum of 30 minutes. Each of these processes are used by various councils across Melbourne without causing disruption to council meetings or impeding decision-making. Rather, they improve decision-making. They would work here and would enhance and encourage community engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was just about to ring the bell. Councillor Watson has a question for you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You mentioned other councils and alluded to the fact that, as I understand it, you've done extensive survey work of how many of the 79 councils have you surveyed and looked at in relation to question time? And
yeah, I can't give you an answer to that because I didn't do that research.
I see.
But we can certainly get that back to you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can't see any further lights on. Thank you. So if you would like to return to your seat, thanks, Ms. Webber. Now our next presentation is Mr. Connor Robinson. I don't think anyone's coming forward, so thank you. So Dr. Meredith Doig on behalf of Rationalist Society of Australia. And again, if you could start with your name and address, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Meredith Doig, Dr. Meredith Doig. I live at 6 Pilley Street in East St Kilda. I'm president of the Rationalist Society of Australia. I come here because I'm concerned to ensure that Australia is a genuinely secular country which is tolerant of both religious and non-religious worldviews.
Thank you.
Firstly, I'd like to thank the officers for making publicly available this summary of the submissions about this issue. about incorporating a religious prayer ritual in council meetings. Contrary to what some councillors may previously have thought, it seems that this issue is of rising concern. Around 90% of the nearly 200 submissions mentioned the prayer issue, and 2/3 of those were opposed to the current ritual. In addition, you may be aware that there's been a public petition which has gathered about over 1,000 signatures, which are also opposed to the current prayer ritual at the City of Boroondara. I did want to make just a small correction to the officer's summary of the Rationalist Society submission. Their summary is correct when it says that rationalists believe that there should be freedom to practice one's belief or faith. But the summary failed to include the second part of that sentence, and it's an important part. The second part of the sentence goes on, as long as doing so does no harm and does not impinge on others' rights. And really, this is the essence of our submission. We say that if you genuinely believe in freedom of religion, then you must also allow others the right to freedom from religion. Let me just briefly elaborate. In a liberal democratic society, it must be true, of course, that everybody is free to believe whatever they want in the privacy of their own minds. But they are not free to manifest those beliefs in any way that they like. We say that there are three principles that should be honoured in a pluralistic and democratic society like ours. They are freedom, equality, and separation. Freedom to practice one's faith or belief as long as by doing so you don't harm others and you don't impinge on their rights. Equality between religious and non-religious worldviews so that neither has an advantage or disadvantage, and I'll finish in just a sec. And separation between the institutions, religious institutions, and the institutions of the state. May I just finalise, Madam Chair, by saying that I would really urge councillors to recognise that the majority of your community has said that they do not want this practice to continue, and that the ethical and the socially responsible thing to do would be to replace what currently exists with a non-sectarian, inclusive statement which is more likely to unite your community than divide it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And I believe Councillor Park has a question for you.
Thank you. Would you know offhand when the Rationalist Society was formed?
1906.
1906. And we've not heard from you previously in respect of this issue, but we've consulted in respect of the governance rules and their predecessors for a very long time. Why is it now an issue of such moment to your organisation?
I think, Councillor Park, you'd find, if you read the history of the Rationalist Society, that we've been on about this issue since about 1925.
Oh, you may well have been,
but perhaps not to this particular council.
And that's the essence of my question, because I'm not, you know, your activities beyond that don't really concern me, but I'm just trying to understand why it's now an issue of such moment, what we do here in the City of Boroondara.
It's not just the City of Boroondara, Councillor. We're concerned with any council that has a similar religious prayer ritual which excludes some people in the community in favour of giving religious privilege to one religion only. So you're not alone.
Thank you. I didn't think I was. Are you familiar with the Society's webpage?
our society's webpage?
Yes.
I am, yes.
Yes. There was reports and a video recording of one of our councillors, Councillor Franco. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
Are you in a position to comment whether the what's transcribed is accurate or not?
Without having the transcription in front of me, I wouldn't care to comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Franco.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the same question that I asked Dr. Jenny Mills of the Humanist Society. Are you aware of any alternative
Could you just
ways?
move a tiny bit closer? We're having trouble hearing your question. Thank you.
Sorry. I'd like to ask the same question of Meredith that I asked Dr. Jenny Mills of the Humanist Society. Are you aware of any alternate ways this could be managed?
Yes, I actually wrote an alternative to religious prayer in 2015. There's a longer version, which I won't read out to everybody, but if I might just recite the shorter version of that, is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
So it goes like this. As we come here today to do the business of governing, we come here today to do the business of governing. Members of this council have pledged to improve the quality of this community and are entrusted with doing so. As we gather, let us remember that though we have our differences, we are linked by our common humanity. In the spirit of goodwill and common decency, may we always show respect for others, compassion for the needy, and integrity in our actions.
Thank you, Councillor Franco.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to understand whether your organisation has as an objective the elimination of prayer in the public realm.
We are not an anti-religious society. We are a pro-secular society. There's a difference. So we believe that, as I said previously, that there should be equality between the religious and non-religious worldviews. So if there is a domination by one worldview, then we believe that that's incorrect. In a democratic and liberal society, pluralistic society, we think there should be equality. Our preference would be for a ritual to begin your meetings which is as inclusive as possible, which does not privilege one particular worldview over any others.
One more follow-up question, if I might, Madam Chair. So, do you believe that a prayer uttered in public is an act of harm?
No, I don't believe that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Gillies, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just referring to the feedback from the community that you mentioned, and you mentioned a petition. Can you just help me? Do you know how many people on that were residents of Boroondara?
No, I don't. And we didn't put the petition up. Somebody else did.
So that, okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you very much. I can't see any other lights on, so thank you for your presentation, Dr. Doig. Now, our next speaker is Mr. Guy Morton. Not here, thank you. Hania Trzowski. No, thank you. Mr. Lee Naunton on behalf of Boroondara Reconciliation Society. Thanks, Mr. Naunton. And if you could give us your name and address.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's Lee Naunton. I stress COVID-free Lee Naunton, back from Canberra yesterday, passed the test this morning. rather had the test this morning, passed it at 3 p.m, so I wasn't available earlier. 260 Baldwin Road, Baldwin North. But many thanks to Council for the opportunity to make this brief presentation to you. I just want to make 2 points. In our submission for the Boroondara Reconciliation Network, we recommended, among other things, that the Statement of Acknowledgement of Country, as presented, is not fit for its intended purpose to show respect to the traditional owners, and that rather it should continue to show respect for the Wurundjeri Wurrung by naming them, acknowledge that they have never ceded sovereignty, acknowledge their dispossession and our responsibility to address its consequences, and acknowledge their strength, resilience and contribution over millennia. And we note the officers' comment that they believe this matter is best dealt with in Council's reconciliation strategy development and will ensure that Council practices will align with this strategy once adopted. And we heartily welcome this and thank the officers and look forward to further consultations on it. The second matter I wish to address is the matter of the prayer in its relationship to the acknowledgement of country. And as you're aware, at council meetings, the Mayor presiding as chairperson asks those present to stand, and the prayer is read. Then the Mayor invites those present to be seated, and the acknowledgement of country is read. We submitted that this has the appearance of making the prayer much more important than the acknowledgement of country, and consequently, we believe that the acknowledgement of country should go first in recognition of the 65,000 years of Aboriginal sovereignty and out of respect for those millennia of care for the land we inhabit and have treated less well. And we believe that people should be either seated or standing for both of these. And a slight error, understandable error, in the officer's statement that they just said standing. We don't have a position on whether it should be seated or standing. The officers responded that it is not recommended to prescribe such practices in the governance rules so that they can more easily adapt to the views of council and chairperson for whom these rules exist. We suggest that as these practices take place in public view at the start of every council meeting, they should be considered as fully purposed for the benefit of the community as well as for the benefit of council and its functions, and that council could develop a policy on these matters which could be reviewed more often than the 4 years, if necessary, that is required usually for the review of meeting procedures. Thank you again, councillors. And may we also say thanks to officers for the very considerable time and consideration that has gone in responses to the great number of submissions and to ours.
Thank you, Mr. Norton. Councillor Franco has his light on with a question.
Thank you. Do you think it's important for the wording of the acknowledgement to go out to public consultation? And do you think it's, if so, would it be satisfactory if that's contained in the reconciliation strategy or action plan? I'm not sure the correct terminology there that we're using at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. Our understanding is that the reconciliation action strategy, when it is developed, would contain a statement of proposed statement of wording for the official wording of acknowledgement, and that would be consulted upon at that time. So the answer in summary is yes. In due course.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I can't see any other lights, so if you'd like to return to your seat, Mr. Norton, and thank you for your presentation. Now, our next speaker is Mr. Victor Hudson, if you would like to come forward. And again, if you could start with your name and address. Thank you.
In Anderson Road, Hawthorn East. I'd like to speak to the issue of the Council Prayer Rule 18A. More than 45 years ago, I bought my first home in Glen Iris, and have owned homes and paid rates in the area ever since. Obviously, therefore, I've lived most of my life in what is currently known as Boroondara. The reasons for buying and living in the area were multiple, including the many public parks and gardens, substantial street trees, great schools, very convenient access to the city and the airport, good civic services, orderly parking and traffic flow, fabulous, well-maintained heritage homes and public buildings, and a well-developed Christian culture. Over recent years, much to my horror, many of these attributes have been eroded to the extent that Boroondara is daily becoming a less livable city. I won't detail the current list of retrograde actions, but I'm compelled to oppose the move to cease using the council prayer at council meetings. We are a community with a strong Christian heritage and tradition, which has successfully guided us to today. So why succumb to minority pressure to change what is not broken? Council must spend its energies and our money improving services which impact ratepayers' daily lives, like rubbish collection, parking, footpaths, heritage protection, traffic, parks and gardens and street trees, rather than trying to cancel positive elements of our heritage. The prayer wording includes people of all faiths, and similar prayers are used in many non-religious settings, such as our federal parliament. We must keep the non-denominational prayer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Hudson. Councillor Franco has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr Hudson. You stated that the prayer is non-denominational and you embrace that aspect of it. Would you feel comfortable if the Christian flavoured prayer that we have were replaced with a Muslim prayer or a Hindu prayer?
Because the religious connection in the prayer is to say Almighty God, and all religions have a God, small g, there is no problem.
Does the Buddhist religion have a God?
Yeah, Buddha.
And look, my final...
Object here, Madam Chair.
My final question is, do you think the prayer sends an important signal or symbolises the importance of Christianity in our community? And do you think its removal would somehow tarnish that?
Yes, I do. It's vital. This is our heritage. The heritage of this city and this country is Christian. And we need to rely on that value stream that comes from those beliefs that have been instilled in us and in our civic organisations throughout the last couple of 100 years. But it's vital, in my opinion.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thank
We've
you,
got some more questions for you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. And I would like you to, look, I won't ask a question, just other than to say thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stavro, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. I will ask a question. I will also thank you for your presentation. And I'm glad you said you've lived in the Boroondara region for 45 years. I guess my question is, given that one of the earlier speakers said to us that the prayer has been in council for 55 years, have you noticed divisiveness in our community over those 45 years that this prayer has been recited in council?
What was the word that you asked me to see if I've noticed?
Yeah. Yes, Mr Hudson.
Yeah, but what was...
divisiveness in the community, or is it a harmonious community, as our logo says?
I see some divisiveness in our council, not in council, but in the community, but not due to there being a prayer. I see divisiveness which we see across the entire Australian society as people go off on all sorts of directions, and you saw the divisiveness, well, I observed it in this chamber before the break, the discussion previously about the park next door. Strong division in the community, nothing to do with the prayer.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Thanks, Mr Hudson. If you'd like to return to your seat. Now, our next listed speaker is Mr Brendan Black. Thank you. And if you'd like to start with your name and address. Thanks, Mr Black.
My name is Brendan Black of Camberwell Road, Camberwell. Dear councillors, ladies and gentlemen, as one of the growing number of Boroondara residents who is not religious, I would like to...
Would you like to take off your mask so we can hear you? If you don't mind, are you comfortable with that?
That's fine. I would like to raise my hand and my voice in opposition to the recitation of a religious prayer before council meetings. As stated in my written submission, traditions change, and the fact that other local councils such as Cardinia, Macedon Ranges and Bendigo have recently seen fit to move with the times and withdraw their religious prayer during council meetings should give Boroondara Council pause to consider whether their own desire to recite a prayer is reflective of widespread and current community sentiment, or is simply an anachronism, an urge to uphold a tradition when the world around it is itself moving away from practicing that same tradition. As you're all no doubt aware, the religious makeup of Boroondara has shifted dramatically over the years to the point where, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics 2016 census stats on religious affiliation, no religion is now the single biggest demographic group in the council area at 37%, which is actually 7% higher than the Australian average. Concerning efforts to maintain the status quo by keeping the prayer, I have to ask, how can you maintain it when the demographics have altered so much? In the council meeting on May 24, council stated that the prayer, and I quote, isn't a concern for our community. It is an all-encompassing prayer. It levels the playing field. It is secular, that its use doesn't infer that any of our residents are second-class citizens, and that it has served the community well. Well, we are concerned, and just looking at the prayer will show you why, as it asks Almighty God to bless the council and direct its deliberations in order to advance the glory of the aforementioned God. I fail to understand then how anyone can argue that this prayer is secular or is not meant to create division between those of the Catholic or Christian faith and those of other faiths or no faith, when it explicitly states that the work of councillors will be guided by and for the benefit of a deity. How can Boroondara Council achieve its vision of a vibrant and inclusive city when the prayer excludes so many of us? If, as David O'Loughlin, the former president of the Australian Local Government Association says, councils are constantly adapting their image to represent the different cultural, ethnic and linguistic backgrounds of their constituents, why is religious prayer in the public space somehow out of bounds? Now, I have to temper my words and say that we non-religious people are not to be feared. We are not seeking to stop you from practicing your religion in your own time, to force you to worship Satan or any other wild misconceptions that are often bandied about concerning the non-religious. We honestly don't care what religion you belong to, if you go to church or however else you may choose to exercise your religious freedoms outside work. Can I just finish up my last
sentence? Yep.
All we ask is that when Boroondara's elected officials go to work on behalf of their constituents, that they put aside their personal religious feelings just as they are meant to put aside their own interests, so they can better reflect the citizens of Boroondara and represent all of us, not just those who happen to believe in a Christian God, so that we can aim for a true separation of church and state at all political levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have a question from Councillor Watson for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation, Mr Hudson. You used... Oh, Mr Black, sorry, my pen, I write everyone's names down on my paper. My apologies. You use the word we. Do you represent an organisation, or are you using the term to say that you represent a body of people?
I don't represent anyone except myself. I guess by using we, it's an easier way of boiling down like-minded people, essentially.
Okay, so you're using, just so I'm clear, you're using the word "we" because you believe you represent that 37%?
No, I not necessarily, no.
Okay.
If there are like-minded people who feel that I'm speaking for them, then fine, but I don't claim to speak for large numbers of non-religious people.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a couple more questions, if I might, Madam Chair. You, in the way that I understood what you were saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, my question is, are you seeking to eliminate religious expression in the public realm?
Not at all.
Okay. Also, you made reference to the council prayer. Are you aware that of the expression that what we are seeking to do is for the benefit of the true welfare of the people of Boroondara?
But it also says in the prayer that it will be for the benefit of the Almighty God, who is stated at the beginning of the prayer.
Okay, so that's the part you object to, not the phrase that says the true welfare of the people of Boroondara.
I have no problem, I don't think anyone here has any problem with councillors working for the benefit of the citizens of Boroondara, which is what you're all here for. I think the issue is that when, as the prayer says, that work is for the benefit, the glory of a particular God, that is what we have the issue with.
So we, as in you represent a particular segment of the community?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Stavrou.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Black, for your presentation. You mentioned some demographics, and I'm curious to unpack them, if you would indulge me for a bit. The way that I look at the 2016 census demographics, if you take out the affiliation not stated, religious affiliation not stated, it would appear to me that people of faith account to 59.2%, and people without faith or no religion, without religion is 40%, 40.8%. So the question to you is, if you were to, this is a 50% larger number for people of faith compared to people of no faith. In terms of, how do you balance that when you look at the equitableness? And I presume that's why you brought in the statistics.
I think it's perhaps disingenuous to lump all religious people together in that demographic, in that number, simply because, for example, the prayer as stated it's for a particular type of denomination. It's basically a Christian prayer. So I think it's difficult to put people of other religions with them, with Christians.
May I?
Another question, yes.
Would it be fair then to put all the people with no religion in the same domain then? Just because they have no religion, that could be completely diverse too.
That's an incredibly good point, and I see your point, and I think if we could look down, dig into those numbers and see what exactly do these people of no religion believe in? Is it just that they're lapsed Catholics? Do they believe something else? Do they have some other spiritual beliefs? That's fine. I'm only going on the statistics that we have, and that's all I can comment on. I'm sorry, I'm not a statistician.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There appear to be no further questions, so thank you, Mr. Black.
Thank you.
Now, our next speaker is Mr. Ian Hundley. And Mr. Hundley, I think you know the drill about name and address.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Ian Hundley and I live at Stephen Street in Balwyn North. I just wanted to address the public question time issue. In my view, public question time provides a public window and an accompanying record on council affairs from which everyone benefits. However, it is now proposed to put further restrictions on public question time, which would compromise this Liberal democratic aspiration. In this regard, the notion that the time devoted to public question time at any meeting may be limited to 15 minutes and that any person may ask only one question at each meeting is now being entertained. However, in reviewing available council meeting records for the last 12 months, I found that there are only 38 questions admitted in that 12-month period. The average duration of public question time was just 8 minutes and 15 seconds at each meeting. The duration of public question time exceeded 15 minutes only once. It is noteworthy that the council meetings themselves, on average, only lasted about an hour and 20 minutes. So I ask, what is the problem here? There isn't one as far as I can see, as far as these proposals are concerned. Council could do much worse than reflect on the local law that was adopted in January 1996, over a quarter of a century ago, as a worthwhile starting point in its consideration of this important matter. Under the local law then, you're basically allowed to ask any question without inhibition on council affairs, apart from the normal sensitivities about defamation, etc. This was a time, you may know, when the commissioners were to be replaced by newly elected, democratically elected councillors in Boroondara and across Victoria. For anyone that views the document, they'll see the 1996 document, the section on public question time is about half the length of the current highly prescriptive and restrictive provisions that have been progressively incorporated into the local law since 2014. I'm happy to provide copies of this document if it's not generally available to councillors, as I'd suggest is a useful starting point in considering this, considering this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Park, I think you have a question for Mr Hundley.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Hundley, imagine a situation where, say, one or two residents feel compelled to come along and ask questions at every meeting. How much is too much? Where, do we get to a point where, you know, one or two residents who take up so much in the way of resources in a city of 185,000 people, when do we get to the point where it's just too much and there needs to be some fencing around that?
As I recall, Councillor Park, in about 2014, the resources issue was addressed and found to be inconsequential. I don't think anything's happened in the intervening 7 years to change that view. I think as part of that analysis, it was found that whether questions are asked at public question time or based, and in a sense not on the public record, or are asked singly and separately by individual residents, the resource issue is pretty much the same.
You had a follow-up question?
Doesn't really go to the nub of the question, though. Just in terms of a single individual or two, do we get to a point where the resources devoted to that person become excessive? Or do you think that's never going to be an issue?
A single individual? I don't see anything in the written proposals that direct attention towards single individuals.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mr Hundley, for joining us tonight. I have a similar question. I was wondering what you think is reasonable as an approach. Is it a number of questions, or would you sooner see us limit question time to a period, or have it totally limitless?
Well, thanks, Councillor Sinfield. I mean, my analysis of what's happened over the last 12 months is, as I suggested, that's not a problem. We should be responding, I think, to practical problems. There isn't a practical problem here in the way it's been defined in these proposed changes to the local law, in my view. There's only one occasion in the last 12 months when public question time on my analysis of the available information exceeded 15 minutes, and in that case I think it was 17 minutes. So
I might rephrase my question.
If nothing's broke, you don't fix it.
might rephrase my
My
question.
view.
So you'd be satisfied if things remained as they are presently, or you'd like to see them further relaxed
Well, I think
than
that,
what the 2021 version?
well, as I said, there's been very unfortunate prescriptive provisions placed there in the last 7 years, since 2014.
Yep.
A series of them. I'd suggest we go back to 1996 in relation to that, where you could basically, a resident, citizen, interested party could turn up and ask a question on any matter related to council affairs, as long as it wasn't offending those requirements in relation to defamation, commercial confidentiality, etc.
Thank you. And I'm curious, your research is quite phenomenal, and you're often teaching us things around this table here. When did you become an avid council watcher and researcher? It's quite phenomenal, your interest.
Well, the truth is I've been a public sector watcher for many years, probably longer than I've been a council watcher.
Thanks. No further questions, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Franco, you had a question?
Thank you. Could you explain the difference or benefit in having an answer on the public record versus an answer being given privately in correspondence? That was an issue you just alluded to before, and I think it's worth elaborating what you mean by that.
Well, I think our system of government relies essentially on openness in everything we do. There are limitations, well-known limitations in relation to commercial confidentiality, where one party might get an advantage if information was disclosed, for example. But by and large, I think we're far better off if the dialogue that relates to matters of governance are basically in the public domain in a way where the generality of citizens are at least in the position to know essentially what's being conducted. And public question time is a small but important part of that. There are probably other things that I'd propose that could be done to actually elevate that, but tonight we're dealing basically with this particular local law, and that's the way I address this particular sub-element, small but important, in relation to that.
Thank you. Councillor Bigger, thank you.
Sorry, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Huntley. So I'm just interested to your last statement about, I guess I was thinking about what do you think does prevent, I mean, I don't think you would necessarily say that you've been prevented from asking the questions that you would like to ask, or do you feel that you have been prevented with the current limitations on public question time?
Yeah, well, the fact that a matter has to be before the council meeting of the night is an inhibition. For instance, the fact that you may have to make representations and to have received a written response from a council officer, elected or not,
which
is also a significant inhibition, I think.
Which is a proposed change, right?
There is a small proposed change there that the answer doesn't necessarily have to be written and received. But that's not really much of a revolution, I think.
It's not enough of a change in your view, you mean? And I don't know if this is a fair question to ask you, but as someone who does ask questions and someone who does, watch council and other governments closely, there aren't many people. I mean, a concern for me, I suppose, is that there aren't as many, not everybody would share this view necessarily, but that there aren't necessarily many members of the public asking questions at public question time, and I would be interested to know if you have a thought about why that is. Is there a key element that prevents people, or you just think people are busy, which is fair enough?
I think there may be a time now when not so many questions are being asked, but going back for the last 7 years, I'd be surprised if that 38 numbers not repeated in other previous years. But these things, to some degree, wax and wane. Depends on the issue of the day. Depends on how activated people may and how angry or how motivated people are on particular issues. I don't think there's any particular predicting of this, but I think the important thing for this institution is that that facility remains available and as unencumbered as possible. That would be my view of it.
Well, thank you, and I'd probably echo Councillor Sinfield's remarks in respect for your research and keeping us on our toes, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stavro.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Huntley, and again, thank you so much for packing so much knowledge in such a small parcel. I really like learning from people such as yourself that have got a long history in doing something, and I just wanted to ask a question. It perhaps may be my naivety about how things used to work, but would you say that, let's look back at 96, 97, where you sort of used it as the base mark year, that perhaps regulations and other aspects were not as, I guess, promoting the kind of transparency along multiple dimensions that are promoted now within local government acts that we must adhere to, and perhaps the reports now are a lot more transparent, and therefore less questions might get, exactly the same outcome as back then, because back then you may have needed more questions to pull out the answer.
Thank you, Councillor Stavro. That's an interesting question. I mean, 1996, we were coming out of the period of the commissioners when the major council amalgamations were coming to fruition. So there'd been a period when the commissioners had basically been operating basically as commissioners operate now when a council has taken over, because councillors have been misbehaving. So I think there was probably an appetite then for freshening things up, and I don't know what happened before 1993, so when that process started, but the 1996 language seems to me to be very refreshing in the context of what we've got now, which is just a very simple form of words that basically provides minimal constraints on the sorts of hoops you have to jump through to actually ask a question on council activity. Now, whether there have been other changes since then that have been favourable or unfavourable, I mean, my view is that the environment in which we're operating now is probably quite heavily constrained in many respects. I mean, we've seen the collapse of local media, for example. That's been quite a major thing. Wasn't a particular...
can we get you just to stick to the topic?
Well, I think the environment, sorry, Chair, but the environment in which we're working now actually does really have its challenges, I think, from a democratic perspective.
Thank you. That appears to have exhausted all the questions. Thanks, Mr. Huntley. If you'd like to return. And now if I could invite Mrs. Mary Drost forward.
It's been a long wait.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you for waiting.
Well, I'm Mary Drost and I live at 34 Prospect Hill Road, Camberwell. And what I wanted to talk about, this is the last item on the agenda, and it's to do with that I was stunned when I heard that somebody wants to get rid of the council prayer. This has been a tradition. When I was on Camberwell Council, I mean, going back forever, the council had a prayer. And I was just shocked that anybody would want to get rid of it. And it's a very simple prayer. And I've been looking here, all this information that was sent to me, people who have put submissions in about it, some for and some against. And but one here from Andrew Price, you probably haven't read them all because there's so much of it. The submitter is supportive of the inclusion of the council prayer in the governance rules as an important part of our culture and history. The submitter further states that the recognition of prayer in our national and state parliaments and in times of community need has long been an Australian tradition. And submitter states that those councillors who do not personally believe in God can use the time for reflection. And somebody else wrote in. Probably haven't looked at any of these, there's so much of it. Judy Heathcote, she says, she supports the retention of the council prayer in the government rules for the following reasons. Historic practice at federal parliament still retain the practice. The prayer is broad, respectful, dignified, and not exclusive. Now, I want to tell you that you may not know, but I lived for 20 years in Jakarta, Indonesia. I go back every year when I can to see friends. And as you know, most Indonesians are Muslim, all right? Now, when I read this prayer that was suggested for here, that could equally, Muslims could use that prayer. Really, any Muslim would say yes. You know, they would use that prayer. I mean, this is a very inclusive prayer that covers, if it covers Christians and Muslims, you know, you couldn't get more opposite. And, you know, I know that not so many people are Christian in Australia as they used to be, but it's still called a Christian country. And Indonesia is most definitely a Muslim country. But that prayer goes across both without any problem at all. And I just think it'll be terrible. I don't know why this has been suggested to get rid of it. You know, it's been a long-standing tradition here at this council to start with a prayer to God. And I would be very, very disappointed in Boroondara Council if you got rid of it. I know that's been brought up, and I would be very, very disappointed if you decided to go with that idea, because I think that I think it's important to carry on these traditions, and you know, it's totally non-denominational. As I say, Muslims could use that prayer.
Thank you. We need to ask you to stop. Thank you.
Please, just keep it going.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Drost. Hang on a sec. We've got a question. Mrs. Drost, we've got a question for you from Councillor Franco.
Righto.
And then Councillor Stavry. Sorry, I'm not sure who was first.
I'll see if I can answer it.
Councillor Franco
Thank
first.
you, Mary. I'm one of the councillors who isn't religious.
I beg pardon, I can't hear.
I'm one of the councillors who isn't religious, so I just wonder what you think would be most appropriate for me in relation to the time at which
you don't want to have the prayer. Well, I would suggest that you just walk out. I think it's quite sensible for anybody who doesn't like it, walk out.
But don't you think I'd be rude if I did that and
Not at all.
offensive?
Not at all. It's up to you.
So you'd think it would be better for me to walk out? I'm being genuine. I'm not asking you this
No,
in
if you
a
don't-
disingenuous
you-
way. I mean, I sometimes struggle with it. Do I sit
If you
here and
disagree
say...
with having the prayer and you don't believe in prayer, then walk out. It's a free country.
It's an answer.
You've got another question?
What about the suggestion, and I put it to you, what's your view, if the prayer rotated and we had, say, a Hindu worded prayer, would you support that one week?
I can't follow what you're saying.
What would you think if we changed the wording of the prayer to reflect different religious outlooks, you know, on different council meetings? So, for example, would you be supportive if we had a Hindu prayer at the next council meeting, for example?
No, I don't think so at all. Not a Hindu country. You know, I've been in India, I know what it's like.
So the
Madam Chair, that's not a fair question.
No, seriously.
That is not a fair
Objection,
question.
Chair.
It's not a fair question. I mean,
No, I think
not
that this prayer would be acceptable anywhere around the world, seriously.
I suspect Mrs. Drost can manage it, but I take your point.
I mean, as I say, I've lived in Indonesia long enough to know that that prayer is totally acceptable to Muslims.
Thank you. And Councillor Stavry, you had a question for Mrs. Drost?
Yes,
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mrs. Drost, you said that you lived in Indonesia for 20 years, and I have a question for you. In all those years, I am sure you would have heard public Muslim prayers in that country. Were you ever offended as a Christian?
I'm sorry?
In the 20 years that you lived in Indonesia, as a Christian, were you ever offended when you heard publicly Muslim prayers?
No, of course not.
Thank you.
That's the way they do it? No. I mean, some of my best friends in the world are Muslim Indonesians, all right?
Thank you.
Okay, nobody else?
Thank you, Mrs. Drost. So look, I'd like to thank all the submitters for their submissions. And now we'll go to councillors if you have any questions for officers. Councillor Thompson.
No questions, Chair. I'm happy to move a motion when the time's appropriate.
Councillor Sinfield, I think you... No?
No question.
Okay. And Councillor Park, you don't either. Okay. I don't think there are any... Councillor Franco, you have a question.
Yes, I do have... Sorry, I do have a question. Sorry, and I wrote it down here for me, for myself just before while I was reflecting on this. It relates to page 6 of the officers' report. And in page 6 of the officers' report, I'll just read the paragraph short, a couple of sentences, and then ask my question. It states, the implications of this report have been assessed in accordance with the requirements of the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities Act. The proposed amendments to the governance rules are not considered to infringe unreasonably upon any prescribed human rights, freedoms or responsibilities contained in the Charter. Now, could you please outline your reasoning for this conclusion in respect of the governance rule, providing for an opening prayer, and in particular, can you advise, 1, which rights protected by the Charter did you consider to be engaged? 2, did you consider that the prayer limits any of those rights? And 3, if so, why did you conclude that the limitation was justified? Thank you.
Are you right to answer that sequence?
Yep, I'll do as best as I can. Thank you, Chair. So to begin with, the main crux of it is the right to participate in public life, freedom of religion, and the main thing is that this is a discretionary provision. So it is up to the councillors on whether the prayer is read, and it's up to each and every councillor whether they participate in said prayer. It is not a mandatory provision. We're also not prescribing and making the members of the gallery participate either. And there is an equal argument that by preventing and hindering people from saying the council prayer could be seen as a hindrance on the Charter as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms Ritchie. And you had a follow-up, Councillor Franco?
Well, how does a councillor not participate? Is it a matter of just walking out the door?
I'm not sure that that's appropriate, but let me just...
I was told just now that it was...
It's up for each councillor to determine.
Could I perhaps add to that? It was quite interesting. Councillor Thompson and I recently met with local member for Hawthorn, and we were having this discussion about the council prayer. And one of the questions we asked was, is the prayer still said in Parliament? And the answer was yes. The follow-up question was, well, what about those councillors who may not, believe, if you like, or think it appropriate to say, those parliamentarians, I should say, who don't believe or don't think they should be participating? And the answer is that they do not enter the chamber until the prayer has concluded. So they make the choice to actually remain out of the room in Parliament whilst the prayer is being said, if that's the view they have. So I guess all I can say is that if it's appropriate in State Parliament, it would be appropriate here for a councillor to choose not to enter the room or indeed to leave the room. But in our case, given it's at the beginning of the meeting, it would probably be appropriate for the councillor not to enter the room. And if you made that choice, given the acknowledgement of country generally follows the prayer, then we would certainly ask that you be present for the saying of the acknowledgement of country, assuming you wish to be present for that purpose.
You had a follow-up question, Councillor Franco?
Yes, I do. In relation to the lawfulness of the current religious prayer ritual, have council officers sought legal advice in relation to that? I asked this question last time, but I'd like to know if such legal advice has been sought, and if not, why not?
The advice of our lawyers is that this matter has not been subject to any legal interpretation by a court of law, and on that basis, as it currently stands, there's no reason to believe it is illegal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for governance, if I may, for Ms Christie. Ms Webber, representing Lighter Footprints, mentioned two things. One is that we put up barriers and that there's a 10-day prior stipulation for a person to lodge a question. Could you please clarify the accuracy of that? Thank you.
Through you, Chair, there is not a 10-day requirement. It is actually the amendment that we've put in. It used to be that a question had to be put in writing and answered before it could be eligible as a public question. Now we're saying that it has to have been put in writing 10 days before a council meeting to the organisation or to a particular councillor, and that's to align it with the requirements of our customer service charter, which says that we will respond within 10 days. So in short, it's making it more accessible because we're removing the limitation of having to have responded as well.
Thank you for that. Madam Chair, if I may just follow up, 10 working days or 10 calendar days?
I believe it's 10 calendar days.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sinfield, you had a question?
Thanks, Chair. I'm wondering if the governance team might have handy the 1996 document that was referenced by Mr Hundley, and if they do, if they might circulate it in due course to councillors for their consideration.
Through you, Chair, we will look for it tomorrow and circulate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I can't see any more questions, so I'll go back to our Mayor, Councillor Thompson. I think you foreshadowed a motion.
I did, Madam Chair, and it's the officer's recommendation to receive and note the verbal and written submissions.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Watson, you've got your light on to second.
Happy to second.
Thank you. For the benefit of the mover and the seconder, is anyone opposed? Councillor Franco, you're opposed?
No, I'm not opposed. I was just waiting to make some comments, that's all.
Okay. So, thank you. So, let me go back to the mover to speak to the motion. Sorry, did you, when you say comments, you just want to speak to the motion? Thank you. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Councillor Thompson.
Chair, if the motion's not opposed, that's not how we do it, and at this hour, I would hope the Chair wouldn't be exercising discretion.
Are you happy for me just to put the motion?
Madam Chair, I'd just like to acknowledge our submitters who've presented today and all of their written submissions as well as their verbal submissions. And it's great that our community is actively engaged with council as a matter of good governance that we have in front of ourselves. So I'll leave it at that because we have some decisions to make in a few weeks' time with regard to the governance rules. But just to note and receive those, I'm very happy to move this motion.
Okay, so you said you weren't opposed, Councillor Franco, so I'm now going to put that motion.
Sorry, will I be allowed to speak or not?
If you're not opposed, no, as Councillor Park said, and it is very late, and we will have another opportunity to talk to this when it comes back to us. So I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? Thank you, that's carried unanimously. So thank you, everyone. So the next item is general business. Councillors, are there any matters of general business? I can't see any lights. Urgent business. Are there any matters of urgent business? No. Confidential business? No. Thank you very much. So thank you, everyone, for attending. And thank you to all of those in the gallery for your attendance. And I don't believe people have been able to join us online, but thank you to everyone for joining us who was able to come in. And I now declare the Services Delegated Committee meeting closed at 10:25. Thank you very much. And we have a 10-minute break before we come back.
Yep. I think, councillors, do you want a quick break before CB&D? And we're going to make CB&D as short as practically possible tonight.